So hey guys, this is your favorite fictional vortex. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto was the sage consort to the primordial snake queen, Naruto x Gorgon, Fate Grand Order. But before we start, remember to subscribe and like this video. Now let's start. Chapter 1. The Call of the Serpent. The salt spray of the Aegean, a phantom limb on his senses, was the first indication that something was amiss. Naruto Uzumaki, a name he wore like a comfortable, well-worn cloak, had not felt the sting of oceanic brine in centuries. Not since the world was younger, and the very concept of nations like the one he currently resided in was the fanciful dream of ambitious chieftains. He sat on the porch of a small, secluded cabin, nestled deep within the verdant, mist-shrouded mountains of what the locals called Japan. The air here was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the phantom salt that now teased his nostrils. He had built this cabin with his own hands, felling the ancient cryptomeria trees with precise, single-stroke applications of wind-aspected energy, a feat that would have been impossible for any modern practitioner of what passed for magic in this era. The wood, still faintly humming with the life force he had so carefully preserved, was a testament to a level of craftsmanship that had been lost to the ages. It was a quiet life, a self-imposed exile from the clamor of the modern world, a world that had largely forgotten the deep, primordial powers that slumbered just beneath its surface. Naruto was not a man of this time. He was an echo, a remnant of a bygone era, a being who had walked the earth when the gods still communed with mortals, and the very fabric of reality was a more malleable, more vibrant thing. He had seen empires rise and fall, had watched the slow, inexorable march of progress grind down the old ways, replacing the wild, untamed magic of the natural world with the cold, sterile logic of science and technology. He had adapted, of course. He was nothing if not a survivor. But a part of him, the ancient, powerful core of his being, longed for the days when the world was a more dangerous, more exciting place. The phantom scent of the sea grew stronger, and with it came a sound, a low, guttural hiss that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of his bones. It was a sound he had not heard in millennia, a sound that belonged to a creature of immense power and antiquity, a creature that should not, by all rights, still exist in this faded, diminished world. He closed his eyes, his senses expanding outwards, reaching far beyond the confines of his mountain sanctuary. He felt the familiar thrum of the ley lines, the invisible currents of magical energy that crisscrossed the globe, and followed the source of the sound. His consciousness soared across continents, a disembodied specter sweeping over the sterile, ordered landscapes of the modern world. He saw cities of glass and steel, monuments to humanity's ingenuity and arrogance. He saw the scars of old wars, the lingering traces of conflicts that had been fought with weapons far cruder and more destructive than the elegant, intricate spells of his time. And then, he found it. A place that did not belong, an island that was a blind spot on every map, a shadow in the collective consciousness of humanity. It was a place of black rock and twisted, petrified trees, an island wreathed in a perpetual storm, a place that screamed of ancient, terrible power. At the heart of the island, in a cavern that delved deep into the earth, he found her. She was a monstrosity, a nightmare-given form. Her body was a writhing mass of serpents, her hair a nest of vipers, and her eyes, when they briefly opened, glowed with a malevolent, golden light that could turn flesh to stone. But beneath the monstrous exterior, Naruto sensed a core of immense, overwhelming despair, a loneliness so profound it was a physical force. A gravity well of sorrow that threatened to pull him in and extinguish his own ancient, resilient spirit. This was the source of the call, the primordial snake queen, a being of myth and legend that the world had tried and failed to forget. She was a creature of the old world, a relic like himself, and she was in pain. A deep, resonant part of him, the part that remembered the raw, untamed power of the earth, answered her silent, desperate plea. He opened his eyes, the scent of pine and damp earth returning to his senses. The phantom salt of the Aegean was gone, replaced by a grim certainty. His quiet life was over. The world, it seemed, was not as diminished as he had believed. There were still monsters, still gods, still a need for a man like him. He stood, his joints popping in a strangely satisfying way, and walked back into his cabin. He had preparations to make. A journey to a place that did not exist, to face a creature that should not be. A small, Genuine smile touched his lips. It had been a long time since he had felt such a thrill of anticipation. The sage was returning to the world, and the world would tremble. The journey to the Shapeless Isle, as it was known in the few fragmented texts that dared to mention it, was not a simple matter of booking a flight or chartering a boat. It was a place that existed outside of the normal, accepted reality of the world. A pocket dimension anchored to a specific, highly charged point in the Aegean Sea. To reach it, one needed more than a map and a compass. One needed a key, a specific resonance of magicka. Energy that would allow passage through the dimensional veil. Naruto, fortunately, was a master of such things. In a hidden workshop beneath his cabin, a space that hummed with the contained power of dozens of intricate, glowing fuinjutsu arrays, he began his preparations. He did not need to pack a bag or gather supplies in the conventional sense. His needs were few, and the tools of his trade were not physical objects, but the intricate, elegant patterns of energy and intent that he could weave with his will. He spent 3 days in his workshop, his hands a blur of motion as he created a series of specialized seals. 1. A complex, multi-layered array inscribed on a small, smooth river stone, would serve as his key, a way to attune his own energy signature to the unique frequency of the Shapeless Isle. Another, a series of smaller, almost invisible seals that he applied directly to his skin, would serve as a ward against petrification, a necessary precaution when facing a creature like the Gorgon. He also prepared a third set of seals, these designed not for protection, but for communication. They were translation arrays, a form of magic he had developed in his youth to better understand the myriad of dialects and languages of the ancient world. He had a feeling that the Gorgon would not be fluent in modern Japanese. On the 4th day, he was ready. He stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast, unbroken expanse of forest, the river stone warm in his hand. He closed his eyes, focusing his will, and poured a small, precisely controlled stream of his own energy into the stone. The fuinjutsu array flared to life, a brief, silent pulse of blue light, and the world around him seemed to shimmer, to lose its solidity. The scent of pine and damp earth was replaced by the sharp, stinging smell of salt and ozone. The gentle whisper of the wind through the trees became the roar of a raging tempest. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the mountains of Japan. He was standing on a beach of black, volcanic sand, the waves of a wine-dark sea crashing against the shore. The sky above was a bruised, angry purple, lit by flashes of lightning that revealed the twisted, petrified forms of ancient, monstrous trees. This was the Shapeless Isle, a place of raw, untamed power, a festering wound on the skin of reality. It was a place that would have driven a lesser man mad, but to Naruto, it felt like a homecoming. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the taste of ancient magic, and began to walk inland. He did not need to search for the Gorgon, he could feel her presence. A suffocating weight on the very fabric of the island's reality. She was in the heart of the island, in a place of great power, a place where the veil between the physical and the spiritual world was at its thinnest. As he walked, he saw the evidence of her power, the frozen, petrified forms of heroes and monsters who had, over the centuries, been foolish enough to seek her out. There were men in ancient Greek armor, their faces twisted in masks of terror. There were creatures that looked like they had been ripped from the pages of a forgotten mythology, their monstrous forms preserved in eternal stone. Each was a silent, grim testament to the Gorgon's power and her all-consuming rage. He found the entrance to her lair, a gaping maw in the side of a black, volcanic mountain. A cave that seemed to swallow the light. He did not hesitate, stepping into the darkness without a moment's pause. The air inside was thick with the smell of old blood and a strange, metallic tang tea. Had he recognized as the scent of a powerful, divine venom. The walls of the cave were lined with more petrified figures, a silent, grotesque audience for the drama that was about to unfold. He followed the winding tunnel deeper into the mountain, the sense of the Gorgon's presence growing stronger with every step. Finally, he emerged into a vast cavern, a space so large that the sounds of his steps were swallowed by the echoing darkness. In the center of the cavern, coiled upon a throne of black, obsidian-like rock, was the Gorgon. She was even more monstrous up close than she had been in his astral projection. Her lower body was that of a colossal serpent, her scales the color of polished jet. Her upper body was that of a woman, but a woman twisted and deformed by rage and despair. Her skin was a pale, sickly green, and her hair was a writhing mass of vipers, their golden eyes glowing in the darkness. She was beautiful and terrible, a goddess of a forgotten age, a creature of immense power and equally immense pain. Her own golden eyes snapped open, and for the first time, Naruto felt the full force of her petrifying gaze. It was not a simple magical effect, it was a curse, a concept. The very idea of stasis, given form and directed with malevolent intent. The seals on his skin flared to life, a barely visible shimmer of blue light, and the force of her gaze washed over him, harmless as a summer breeze. A low, guttural growl rumbled in the Gorgon's chest, a sound of surprise and fury. "You are not turned to stone," she hissed, her voice a chorus of sibilant whispers. The sound of scales slithering over rock. "Why are you not turned to stone?" Naruto met her gaze without flinching, his own eyes, a deep, ancient blue, calm and steady. "Because I am not like the others who have come to this place," he said, his voice, thanks to the translation seals, emerging as a series of soft, sibilant hisses that she could understand. "I am not here to slay you, nor to steal your power. I am here because you called." The Gorgon's eyes narrowed, her serpentine body tensing, the vipers in her hair hissing and spitting in agitation. "I called no one," she snarled. "I want nothing to do with your kind. Leave this place, or I will tear you limb from limb." Naruto took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate, his hands held open in a gesture of peace. "You did not call with your voice," he said, his tone gentle, almost hypnotic. "You called with your pain. A pain so great it has echoed across the ages, a pain that has disturbed the very balance of the world. I am here to help you." For a long moment, the Gorgon was silent, her golden eyes studying him with a mixture of suspicion and a flicker of something else, something that might have been a desperate, long-forgotten hope. Then, with a roar of rage that shook the very foundations of the mountain, she lunged. The battle, if it could be called that, was a study in contrasts. The Gorgon was all sound and fury, a whirlwind of claws, fangs, and petrifying gazes. She moved with a speed that belied her immense size, her serpentine body a blur of motion in the cavern's gloom. She struck with the force of a battering ram, her claws capable of shattering the obsidian-like rock of her throne. Naruto, in contrast, was a study in calm, effortless grace. He did not meet her attacks with brute force, he redirected them. Flowing around her like water around a stone, he moved with an almost supernatural fluidity, his body a blur of motion that was always just out of her reach. He did not strike back, did not even attempt to harm her. He simply endured. The Gorgon grew more and more frustrated, her attacks becoming more and more frenzied. She unleashed the full force of her petrifying gaze, a beam of golden light that could have turned a mountain to dust, but it washed over Naruto without effect. She spat her divine venom, a substance so potent it could have dissolved steel, but he simply deflected it with a wave of his hand, a small, intricate fuinjutsu array flaring to life in the air before him and neutralizing the poison. Finally, exhausted and enraged, the Gorgon coiled back, her chest heaving, her golden eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and confusion. "What are you?" she hissed, her voice trembling with a frustration that bordered on despair. "Why won't you fight back? Why won't you die?" Naruto came to a stop a few feet from her, his breathing even, his clothes and hair undisturbed. He looked at her, not with pity, but with a deep, profound understanding. "I told you," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I am not here to fight you. I am here to help you." He took another step forward, and this time, the Gorgon did not attack. She watched him, her body tense, her mind reeling from the sheer impossibility of what she was witnessing. He reached out a hand, his movements slow and deliberate, and gently touched the side of her face. His touch was not what she expected. She had expected revulsion, fear, the same reactions she had received from every living thing she had encountered for centuries. But his touch was warm, gentle, and utterly devoid of fear. It was a touch that spoke of acceptance, of understanding, of a deep, ancient empathy. And for the first time in a very long time, the Gorgon, the monster, the primordial snake queen, felt something other than rage and despair. She felt a flicker of warmth, a tiny, fragile spark of hope in the vast, cold darkness of her soul. A single, crystalline tear, a substance that should not have been possible for a creature of her nature, welled up in her golden eye and traced a shimmering path down her scaled cheek. It was a tear of surprise, of confusion, of a pain so deep and so old that it had almost forgotten how to express itself. Naruto said nothing. He simply stood there, his hand on her face, his calm, steady presence a balm to her tormented soul. He knew that this was just the beginning, that her pain was a wound that had festered for centuries and would not be healed in a single night. But it was a start. The sage had found his purpose, and the Serpent Queen had found a reason to hope. The world, though it did not yet know it, had been irrevocably changed. The first, tentative notes of a new, epic song had been played, a song of a man and a monster, of a love that would defy gods and rewrite the very laws of reality. The quiet, secluded life of Naruto Uzumaki was well and truly over, and in its place, a new legend was about to be born. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Stone. The tear, a single, impossible jewel of condensed sorrow, completed its shimmering journey down her scaled cheek and fell with a soft, crystalline chime upon the obsidian floor. It did not splash. It shattered, the sound echoing through the vast, silent cavern like the breaking of a 1,000-year-old vow. The Gorgon's entire colossal form was rigid, a statue carved from frozen shock, her golden eyes, which had petrified armies and gods alike, now wide with a raw, disbelieving vulnerability. His touch lingered, a phantom warmth against her cold skin, a sensation so alien, so long forgotten, that it bordered on painful. The vipers that comprised her hair, usually a writhing, hissing corona of her inner turmoil, were momentarily stunned into stillness, their own small, golden eyes blinking in shared confusion. Naruto retracted his hand slowly, deliberately, giving her the space she had never been afforded in her cursed existence. He did not break eye contact, his own cerulean gaze holding no trace of the fear or revulsion that had been her constant companions for millennia. He saw not the monster, the slayer of heroes, the terror of the Aegean. He saw the being beneath the curse, the goddess shackled by a divine injustice, the soul drowning in an ocean of isolation. His expression was one of profound, ancient calm, the tranquility of a mountain that has weathered countless storms. "It is not a weakness to feel," he said, his voice once again a series of soft, resonant hisses that the translation seals wove into the air. The words were simple, yet they struck her with the force of a physical blow. Weakness was all she had ever been accused of, first in her original, divine form, and then in this monstrous parody of it. Her strength was a curse, her power a source of terror. The very concept of her feelings being anything other than a monstrous rage was a foreign language. Her serpentine body shifted, the sound of countless scales scraping against the stone a low, grinding grow. That was her first attempt at a response. What did you do?" she finally rasped, the words torn from a throat more accustomed to shrieks of fury and roars of despair. Her gaze flickered from his face to his hand, as if she expected it to be smoking or glowing with some arcane power. "I did nothing," Naruto replied, his posture relaxed, a stark contrast to her coiled tension. "I simply listened. Your sorrow is a tangible thing on this island, Gorgon. It saturates the very rock, it gives voice to the wind, it weeps in the endless rain. You have been screaming into the void for so long, that you have forgotten what it is to be heard." He took a half step back, a gesture of respect for her personal space, a concept she had likely never been granted. "I am not here out of pity. Pity is an insult to suffering as profound as yours. I am here because of balance. An agony this great, left untended, becomes a poison that can sicken the world itself. It pulls the fabric of reality out of alignment. As a sage, one who seeks harmony with the world's energies, I cannot ignore it." The word, sage, seemed to resonate with something deep within her, a fragment of a memory from a time before the curse. A time when such beings walked the earth, communing with the primordial forces that she herself embodied. The fury in her eyes, her default state of being, was now diluted with a potent, unsettling confusion. He was not a hero seeking glory. He was not a god seeking to enforce his judgment. He was something else, something older, and his motivations were as alien to her as his touch. "Balance," she sneered, the sound a wet, venomous hiss, a faint echo of her usual ferocity returning. The world knows nothing of balance. It is a scale weighted by the whims of arrogant, fleeting gods. They created me, and then they condemned me for what they made. Where was your balance, then? It was absent, Naruto conceded without hesitation, his honesty disarming her more effectively than any weapon could. And the world has been paying the price ever since. The age of gods withered and died, in no small part, because of such imbalances. They grew arrogant, they forgot their purpose, and they were, in turn, forgotten. You, however, have endured, a testament to a power they could curse but never truly extinguish. He gestured to the cavern around them, to the oppressive darkness and the chilling damp. This place, it is your sanctuary and your prison. It is a reflection of your soul. Cold, dark, alone. But it does not have to be. Before she could formulate a venomous retort, before she could accuse him of speaking in empty platitudes, he acted. He brought his hands together in a simple, unfamiliar seal. His eyes closed for a brief moment, and when they opened, they seemed to hold the soft, gentle light of a dawn she hadn't seen in eons. He knelt, placing one palm flat against the cold, unforgiving obsidian floor. The earth remembers warmth, he murmured, more to himself than to her. A fuinjutsu array, an intricate, impossibly complex lacework of glowing blue characters, spread out from his palm like a blooming flower of light. It expanded rapidly, silently, covering a wide circle of the cavern floor about 30 feet in diameter. The characters pulsed with a soft, steady rhythm, like a slow, sleeping heart. A gentle, pervasive warmth began to emanate from the stone, a warmth that chased away the bone-deep chill that had been her constant companion. It was not the searing heat of a fire, but the comforting, life-giving warmth of a sun-drenched rock on a summer's day. Gorgon flinched back, her serpentine tail coiling defensively. Her hair snakes hissed in alarm at the sudden, inexplicable change in their environment. She watched, her monstrous features a mask of stunned disbelief, as the very air within the circle of light seemed to grow less heavy, less saturated with despair. The perpetual dampness receded, and the faint, cloying scent of blood and decay was replaced by something clean. Something that smelled faintly of sunlight and clean stone. But he was not finished. He rose and walked to a far corner of the cavern where a dark, stagnant pool of water had collected, fed by a slow, constant drip from the ceiling. The water was brackish, lifeless. Naruto simply dipped his fingers into the pool. Again, no grand incantation, no dramatic flare. A barely visible ripple of azure energy spread from his touch, and the water began to change. The murky darkness clarified, the foul scent vanished. Within moments, the pool was filled with water so pure and clear it seemed to hum with life, the light from his floor seal making it sparkle as if filled with liquid diamonds. All things, even in their deepest despair, hold the memory of what they were meant to be, he said. Turning back to her, stone remembers the sun, water remembers the sky, and a goddess remembers the feeling of being worshipped. Gorgon stared at the circle of warmth, at the pool of pure water. These were simple things, elemental comforts that she had been denied for so long she had forgotten they even existed. Heroes had brought swords and shields. Gods had brought judgment and chains. This man, this sage, brought her warmth. He brought her clean water. He offered not a challenge to be overcome, but a comfort to be accepted. It was a strategy so utterly alien, so completely unexpected, that her mind, honed by millennia of rage and paranoia, had no defense against it. Hesitantly, cautiously, as if approaching a hunter's trap, she uncoiled a small portion of her massive tail and extended it towards the glowing circle. The instant her scales made contact with the warmed stone, a violent shudder ran through her entire body. It was not a shiver of cold, but a tremor of pure, unadulterated shock. The warmth was real. It seeped into her, a gentle, insistent heat that felt both wonderful and terrifyingly foreign. She had grown so accustomed to cold that warmth felt like an intrusion, a violation of the misery that had defined her for so long. She snatched her tail back as if burned, her golden eyes wide with a new kind of fear. A fear not of attack, but of comfort. A fear that if she allowed herself to feel this, the all-consuming rage that had sustained her for centuries might begin to fade, and she did not know what, if anything, would be left of her in its absence. Naruto simply watched her, his expression patient, understanding. He did not push, did not urge her forward. He had created the space, it was up to her to enter it. He walked to the edge of the purified pool, cupped his hands, and drank deeply. He then sat, cross-legged, at the very edge of the warm circle, placing himself between her and this new, strange comfort, yet not blocking her path to it. He was a silent, unassuming guardian of a peace she had not yet decided if she wanted. Minutes stretched into an hour. The only sounds were the distant, muted roar of the storm outside the mountain and the soft, rhythmic pulse of the light from the Fuinjutsu array. Gorgon remained coiled in the darkness, a shadowy behemoth watching the lone, calm figure in the gentle light. Her mind was a maelstrom. Every instinct screamed at her to lash out, to destroy this inexplicable anomaly, to plunge her cavern back into the familiar, miserable darkness. To annihilate this man who, with a simple touch and a few quiet words, had shaken the foundations of her cursed existence. Yet, she did not move. The warmth was a siren's call to her cold-blooded body. The purity of the water was a promise of an end to the foulness that filled her lair. And the man was an enigma that defied every category of being she had ever known. Finally, driven by a curiosity that was stronger than her fear, she spoke again, her voice a low, gravelly whisper. Why? The single word was freighted with the weight of ages, a question directed not just at him, but at the cosmos itself. Why do this? What do you want from me? There is nothing here for you to take. No treasure, no glory, only a monster and a curse. Naruto opened his eyes, which had been closed in quiet meditation. I have had more glory than any one man deserves, and I have learned it is a hollow, fleeting thing. I have possessed treasures that could make kings weep, and I have found them to be meaningless burdens. What I want is to understand. He shifted his position, turning to face her more directly. You spoke of the gods, of their betrayal. Tell me what happened. Not the story the mortals tell, the one of a vain monster punished for her hubris. Tell me your story. Words have power, Gorgon. Sometimes, a story that has been locked in darkness for too long needs to be brought into the light. If only to see if it can survive the telling. The invitation hung in the air between them, a fragile, shimmering thing. It was a request for the most precious, most dangerous thing she possessed, her truth. To speak of it would be to relive it, to tear open wounds that had never truly healed. It was a terrifying prospect. But as she looked at him, at the unwavering sincerity in his ancient eyes, she felt a different kind of terror. The fear that if she did not speak, she would truly be lost forever, a silent scream trapped in the amber of her own misery. Slowly, ponderously, like a continent shifting, she began to move. Not to attack, but to draw closer. She slithered out of the deep shadows, her immense form entering the soft glow of his created sanctuary. The warmth enveloped her, and another tremor racked her body. But this time she did not pull away. She settled herself just outside the glowing circle, her upper body raised, allowing her to look down at the seated man. Her hair snakes, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, were silent and still. We were beautiful, she began, her voice cracking with disuse, with the pain of the memory itself. My sisters, Steno and Euryale, and I. We were goddesses, perfect goddesses, idols for mortal men to worship. They adored us, and we were vain. We enjoyed their adoration. We were happy. The word sounded alien on her tongue, a relic from a forgotten language. But I was different, she continued, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. My sisters were born as perfect goddesses. Complete, immortal. I was not. I was mortal, imperfect. I grew, I changed. And that imperfection, the gods said, was the flaw that allowed Poseidon to. She choked on the name, a wave of ancient shame and fury washing over her. Her claws, thick as daggers, dug into the stone beneath her, carving deep gouges. Naruto remained silent, his gaze a steady anchor in the storm of her memory. He did not offer empty condolences. He simply listened, providing her the canvas of his attention on which to paint her tragedy. He forced himself upon me. In Athena's temple, the words were stones ripped from her throat. He defiled me. He defiled her sacred space. And she, the glorious goddess of wisdom, she did not punish him. He was a powerful male god, after all. Who did she punish? Me, the victim, the mortal, the imperfect, one who had allowed her temple to be stained. Quote, the air in the cavern grew colder, the light from the Fuinjutsu array seeming to dim as her rage intensified. The storm outside the mountain, which had been a low, muted roar, began to howl with renewed, sympathetic fury. She cursed me. Her jealousy, her petty, divine rage, twisted me into this. She gestured to her own monstrous form with a clawed hand, a gesture of profound self-loathing. She turned my hair into serpents. She gave me these claws, this body. And she gave me these eyes. The power to turn any living thing that looked upon me to stone. She said that if I was so beautiful that men and gods could not control themselves, then she would make me a creature whose beauty no one would ever dare to look upon again. My sisters, they stood by me. Their love for me was so great that they chose to be exiled with me, here, to this shapeless isle. They were all I had left. She paused, her breath coming in ragged, hissing gasps. And then the heroes came. One after another, sent by the gods to slay the monster, to win glory by taking my head. They killed my sisters, my sweet, beautiful sisters, who had done nothing wrong. They died protecting me. A sound escaped her then. A terrible, wrenching sound that was half sob, half shriek. It was the sound of a heart breaking for the 1000th time. I killed the heroes. I killed them all. I watched them turn to stone. Their faces frozen in terror. And I hated them. But more than that, I hated myself. Because Athena was right. I was a monster. I had become the thing she had cursed me to be. She fell silent, her story told. The cavern was filled with the echoes of her pain, a raw, living entity that seemed to suck all the warmth from the air. She waited for his judgment, for his revulsion, for the inevitable declaration that she was, indeed, a monster who deserved her fate. Naruto did not speak for a long time. He seemed to be absorbing her story, weighing every word, every nuance of her pain. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a profound, sorrowful empathy. They did not create a monster, Gorgon, he said, his voice soft but clear, cutting through the maelstrom of her grief. They took a goddess, and they tried to bury her under a mountain of pain. They failed. He rose to his feet and, for the second time, he approached her without fear. I too have known the loneliness of being seen as a monster, he said, his voice taking on a distant, reminiscent quality. When I was a child, a great and terrible power was sealed within me. A creature of immense rage and destruction. The people of my village did not see a boy, they saw the demon. They whispered behind my back. They shunned me. Their eyes were filled with fear and hatred. For a long time, I believed them. I believed I was a monster. Gorgon stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend his words. This man, this being of immense calm and power, had been feared. Hated. It seemed impossible, but a monster is not defined by the power it holds, or by the form it wears, Naruto continued, his eyes locking with hers. It is defined by its choices. You did not choose to be cursed. You did not choose for heroes to hunt you. You chose to defend your home and the memory of your sisters. You have endured a torment that would have shattered any lesser being. What I see before me is not a monster. It is a survivor. He stood before her now, so close he could have touched her again. He did not. He simply offered her his words, his shared experience, as a bridge across the chasm of her solitude. For the first time, someone had heard her story and had not condemned her. He had reframed her narrative, not as a fall from grace, but as an epic of endurance. It was a perspective she had never considered. A possibility she had never dared to entertain. A fragile, tentative peace began to settle in the cavern. The storm outside, as if finally exhausting its rage, softened into a steady, gentle rain. The Fuinjutsu array on the floor pulsed with its soft, warm light, a single point of stability in a world of chaos. Gorgon felt the tightly coiled knot of rage in her chest loosen, just a fraction. It was still there, a dense, heavy thing, but it no longer felt like the only thing. It was in this moment of nascent tranquility that Naruto's posture changed. His head snapped up, his gaze directed not at her, but towards the mouth of the cave, towards the world outside. His calm, meditative aura vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. His senses, far more vast and subtle than her own, had detected an intrusion. What is it? Gorgon hissed, her own body tensing, the familiar paranoia and defensiveness flooding back in an instant. "Someone is knocking at our door," Naruto said, his voice low and serious. He could feel it clearly now. A thin, precise, needle-like probe of magical energy, vastly different from the raw, elemental power of the Age of Gods. This was structured, academic, complex. It was the magic of the modern age, of humanity. It was meticulously trying to analyze the dimensional boundaries of the shapeless isle, to map its contours, to understand the nature of the power contained within. "Another hero," she snarled, the vipers in her hair beginning to stir and hiss. "No, something different," Naruto mused, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the energy signature. "A seeker of knowledge, curious, relentless. The mages of this era are persistent. They see a mystery, and they cannot resist the urge to dissect it." He walked to the mouth of the cavern, staring out into the rain-swept, petrified forest. He raised a hand, and the air before him shimmered. He began to weave a new seal, this one not of light or warmth, but of shadow and illusion. Complex characters of dark, swirling energy flowed from his fingertips, coalescing in the air into a vast, invisible web that he then cast outwards, stretching it until it encompassed the entire island. It was a cloaking array, a barrier of misdirection. It would not destroy the probe, but would scramble it, feeding it false data, making the island appear as nothing more than an unusual, temporary distortion in the local space-time. A natural anomaly not worth a second look. The probe brushed against his barrier, recoiled in confusion at the nonsensical data it received, and after a few more persistent attempts, it withdrew. For now, Naruto lowered his hand, a thoughtful, grim expression on his face. He turned back to the Gorgon, who had watched his casual display of high-level magic with silent awe. "I have hidden us for the moment," he said. "But they know something is here. The peace you have been afforded, even the miserable peace of this prison, is over. The age of man will not leave a power like yours unturned. They will come." He walked back to the circle of light and sat down, his expression calm once more, but with a new undercurrent of resolve. "But let them come," he said, his eyes meeting hers. A silent promise passing between them. "They will find that this island is no longer the prison of a lonely monster. It is the sanctuary of a queen. And her sage consort will be here to greet them." Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Scholar and the Storm. The title, Sage Consort, hung in the air between them, a declaration as solid and as strange as the warm stone beneath her. Gorgon processed the two words separately. Sage, she understood in a distant, academic sense. They were figures from the dawn of the world, wise ones who communed with nature and sought a harmony. Why she had only ever known as an abstract concept. But, consort, that was a word loaded with 1,000 different meanings, most of them intimate, all of them terrifying. It implied a partnership, a closeness, a shared existence that was the antithesis of the absolute, soul-crushing isolation that had been her reality for time out of mind. It was a promise so audacious, so impossible, that it bordered on cruelty. Consort, she finally managed to hiss, the word feeling clumsy and foreign in her throat. The vipers of her hair, which had stilled in the aftermath of her confession, began to stir again, not with aggression, but with a restless, uncertain energy. "You speak nonsense. I am a monster in a cave. I have no court. I have no throne worth the name. A consort to, what? To this darkness, to this misery." Naruto met her skepticism not with argument, but with a quiet, unshakable certainty. He had not returned to his meditative posture but remained standing, a pillar of calm in her chaotic world. Every being of immense power gathers a domain around them, whether they intend or not. This island is your domain. Its perpetual storm is a reflection of your untamed sorrow. Its petrified trees are monuments to your tragic history. You are its queen, whether you claim the title or not. A queen should not have to face the world alone. He paused, letting the words settle. And the world is no longer content to leave you be. My declaration was not a proposal, Gorgon. It was a statement of fact. A new piece has been placed on the board. Me. His confidence was absolute, a force of nature in itself. It was not arrogance. It was the simple, straightforward assessment of a being who knew his own capabilities and his own intentions with perfect clarity. He was not asking her permission. He was informing her of a new reality, a reality in which she was no longer solitary. For Gorgon, whose entire existence had been defined by a lack of choice, this should have been infuriating. It should have felt like another violation, another being imposing their will upon her. Yet, it did not. His presence felt less like a cage and more like a shield, one that had just proven its efficacy against an unknown threat from the outside world. The fragile peace of this new understanding was shattered by a subtle shift in the air. Naruto's head tilted, a flicker of deep concentration in his cerulean eyes. The cloaking array he had woven around the island, a masterwork of illusion and misdirection, was being tested again. But this was not the tentative, needle-like probe from before. This was something different, something far more persistent and analytical. They were not deterred. Gorgon growled, the familiar anger a comforting, well-worn cloak to pull on in the face of the unknown. They return. Not exactly, Naruto corrected, his gaze fixed on a point far beyond the cavern walls. The first probe was a casting net, thrown wide to see what it might catch. This is a scalpel. They are not trying to break through the barrier, they are studying it. They've recognized that the nonsensical data they are receiving is not a natural phenomenon, but the product of a sophisticated, deliberately constructed ward. The ward itself has become the mystery they seek to solve. He let out a soft, almost amused sigh. The curiosity of the modern mage is a formidable, and often troublesome, force. Outside, the storm that had softened to a gentle rain began to churn once more. The wind howled through the petrified branches of the forest, a mournful, angry chorus. Gorgon felt her own internal tempest rising to meet it. Then let them come, she roared, her voice echoing off the cavern walls, shaking loose pebbles from the ceiling. Let them see the monster they are so curious about. They will make fine additions to my garden of statues. Patience, Naruto counseled, his voice a low, calming counterpoint to her fury. Rage is a powerful weapon, but it is a blind one. It strikes friend and foe alike and tires the wielder more than the target. Let us first understand who it is that seeks us before we decide upon their fate. He closed his eyes, his consciousness expanding, merging with the very fabric of the island. He could feel the intruder's magic now, a precise, intricate pattern of energy that was methodically, painstakingly, deconstructing the outer layers of his illusion. It was like watching a master locksmith picking an impossibly complex lock, not with force, but with intellect and a delicate touch. He could feel the mind behind the magic, sharp, disciplined, academic, and possessed of a supreme, almost arrogant, confidence in its own abilities. This was no mere adventurer. This was a scholar of the highest caliber, a practitioner of a refined, systematic thaumaturgy that was a world away from the raw, elemental forces of his own era. Suddenly, through the mists that perpetually shrouded the island's shores, a vessel emerged. It was not a ship of wood or steel. It was a sleek, silent craft of polished obsidian and what looked like solidified moonlight, gliding over the churning waves without displacing a single drop of water. It moved with an unnatural grace, propelled by a low, silent hum of magical energy. The vessel came to a stop 100 yards from the black sand beach, and a single, shimmering bridge of light extended from its side to the shore. A lone figure walked down the bridge of light. From Naruto's sensory perspective, miles away in the cavern, he could perceive her aura with perfect clarity. It was sharp and bright, the color of a winter sky, humming with meticulously controlled power. When the figure stepped onto the black sand, she became visible to his physical sight, a distant but clear speck against the gloom. Gorgon, whose own senses were intrinsically tied to the island, saw her too. She saw a woman, dressed in a severe, exquisitely tailored dark blue coat that seemed to repel the rain, which fell in a curtain around her but did not touch her. She had silver hair, cut in a sharp, asymmetrical style, and her posture was one of rigid, academic poise. She moved with an economy of motion, a RPO-cephalness that spoke of a life lived by discipline and intellect. The woman did not immediately venture inland. Instead, she began a process of meticulous preparation. From a small, leather satchel that seemed to hold far more than its size would suggest, she produced a series of intricate silver devices that looked like a cross between astrolabes and compasses. She placed them on the beach in a precise, hexagonal pattern. As she activated them, each one projected a faint, shimmering field of blue light, the 6 fields linking together to form a larger, stable perimeter. It was a bounded field, a temporary workshop and safe zone. Standard procedure for a mage operating in hostile territory. Inside this protected space, she began her true work. She knelt, tracing complex circles and runes on the sand with a silver-tipped wand. As she chanted in a low, rapid, and highly technical-sounding language, the air around her began to crackle with power. She was not attacking. She was observing, casting complex diagnostic and scrying spells designed to analyze the very nature of the island's magical energy, its history, its spiritual density. In the cavern, Gorgon was a coiled spring of murderous intent. She defiles this land with her geometric filth. She hissed, her claws digging into the stone. Allow me to go. I will end this quickly. And what then? Naruto asked, his tone even. Another statue for your collection. Another soul sacrificed to your pain. You would be reacting, not acting. A queen does not simply react to the presence of an ant in her garden. She first determines if it is a pest to be crushed or a curiosity to be observed. He turned his gaze from the distant beach back to her. This is your first test as a queen, Gorgon. Can you master the rage that has been your only tool for so long? Or will you remain its slave? His words were a challenge, and a painful one. He was asking her to deny the only impulse that had kept her sane, the only action she had ever given her a sense of control in her cursed life. To kill those who trespassed was her nature, her purpose, the very function of the monster she had become. To simply watch felt like a surrender. But as she looked into his calm, steady eyes, she saw not judgment, but encouragement. He was not ordering her. He was guiding her, teaching her a new way to be. With a low, guttural growl of frustration that shook her entire body, she forced herself to remain still. She would watch. For now, for the next several hours, they observed the silver-haired mage as she worked. She was tireless, her focus absolute. She cast dozens of different spells, each one more complex than the last. She analyzed the petrified trees, taking microscopic samples of the stone and subjecting them to arcane analysis. She measured the ambient magical energy, cataloging its unique, primordial signature. She even managed to capture a sample of the storm's rain, sealing it in a crystal vial to study its properties. She was not a warrior. She was a scientist, and the shapeless isle was the greatest laboratory she had ever discovered. Naruto found himself grudgingly impressed. The woman's technique was flawless. Her knowledge of modern thaumaturgical theory encyclopedic. She was a prodigy, a true master of her craft. But he also saw the flaw in her approach. She saw the island as a collection of data points, a phenomenon to be quantified and understood. She did not feel its pain, its history, its living, breathing soul. She was reading the words of a tragic poem but was utterly deaf to its music. Finally, having gathered all the preliminary data she could from the beach, the mage packed away her instruments, leaving only the bounded field active. She looked inland, towards the dark, volcanic mountain at the island's heart. Her expression a mixture of academic curiosity and calculated ambition. She was ready to move to the next phase of her investigation. She is coming for the source, Gorgon stated, the words a low rumble. For me, yes, Naruto affirmed. It is time we introduced ourselves. He stood up. Stay here, he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. Do not reveal yourself unless I call for you. Trust me, Gorgon. Trust that I will handle this in a way that does not require more bloodshed. The plea, the request for trust, was a more powerful restraint than any physical chain could ever be. It was a gift he was asking her to give him, and after he had listened to her, after he had offered her comfort and a new name for her suffering, she found, to her own astonishment, that she could not refuse. She nodded, a single, sharp, jerky motion, and watched as he turned and walked out of the cavern, alone, calm figure heading out to intercept the storm of the modern world. Naruto moved through the petrified forest with a silence that was more profound than the absence of sound. The gnarled, twisted stone trees, the frozen figures of slain heroes, stood as silent sentinels to his passage. The rain did not touch him, parting a few inches from his body as if he wore an invisible cloak. He did not use this to hide himself. On the contrary, he allowed his own energy signature, which he had kept carefully suppressed, to flare slightly, a gentle, controlled pulse of immense, ancient power. He wanted the mage to know she was being approached. He wanted to dictate the terms of this meeting. Far below, on the path leading up the mountain, Alara Vane stopped dead. All her delicate instruments, which she had recalibrated to monitor the island's ambient energy, suddenly screamed in alarm. Their needles and crystals overloading from a sudden, massive spike in localized power. It was not a chaotic, natural surge like the storm. This was controlled, focused, and impossibly dense. It was like detecting a sudden, miniature sun appearing a few hundred meters away. Her academic composure, for the first time, cracked. Her hand instinctively went to a series of silver rings on her right hand, each one a potent single-action defensive spell. "Identify yourself," she called out, her voice sharp and clear, betraying none of the shock she felt. "You are in violation of the Clock Tower's quarantine directive concerning uncharted dimensional faults." From out of the mists and the petrified trees, Naruto emerged. He stopped about 50 feet from her, his hands tucked into the sleeves of his simple, dark robes. He looked unassuming, a man out of time, yet the sheer pressure of his presence was a physical force that made the air around him feel thick and heavy. "Your clock tower has no authority here, scholar," Naruto said, his voice calm and carrying easily over the wind. The translation seals he wore worked perfectly, rendering her modern, technical language into something he understood and his own ancient tongue into words she could comprehend. "This land is not an uncharted fault. It is a sovereign domain. And you are trespassing." Alara's eyes, the color of sharp, gray flint, narrowed. She performed a dozen rapid, silent diagnostic scans, her mind racing to process the information. The man before her registered as human, biologically. But his energy output was astronomical. Far beyond that of any recorded magus, living or dead. And his, the personal life force energy of a living being, was so deep and ancient it was like looking into the heart of a star. It was impossible. It defied every known law of modern magecraft. "My name is Alara Vane, of the Department of Spiritual Evocation," she said, choosing diplomacy over aggression for the moment. "I am here on a research expedition. The energy signatures emanating from this location are unique, a perfectly preserved echo from the Age of Gods. Their study is vital to our understanding of the very foundations of mystery. I mean no harm. I am merely an observer. An observer who dissects what she sees," Naruto countered, his gaze unflinching. "You look at this island and you see a phenomenon. You see data. You do not see the being whose agony gives this place its power. You would peel back her skin to see how her sorrow functions, and you would call it understanding. That is not observation. It is violation." Alara was taken aback by the accusation, and by the strange, personal nature of his defense. "The being you speak of, the source of the energy, is a Category X threat. A Gorgon, a divine monster responsible for the deaths of countless heroes of legend. Its containment and study are a matter of global security." A small, sad smile touched Naruto's lips. "You have read the stories written by the victors. By the ones who created the monster, in the first place. You have not read the heart of the one who has suffered. You seek knowledge, Alara Vane. But you seek it with cold instruments and a colder heart. There is knowledge to be had here, but it cannot be taken by force or by stealth. It can only be received, as a gift." The sheer audacity of his statement, the condescending way he spoke of her life's work, stung Alara's pride. "And I suppose you are the gatekeeper of this knowledge?" she asked, a sarcastic edge to her voice. "I am," Naruto replied simply, the lack of any boastfulness making the declaration all the more impactful. "I am the sage consort of the primordial snake queen who reigns here. And I am offering you a choice. You can turn around, leave this island, and present your clock tower with the interesting tale of a powerful ward and a strange man. Or, you can be the first person in millennia to be granted an audience with a goddess. You may ask your questions, and perhaps they will be answered. But you will do so as a guest in her court, not as a scientist in a lab. You will leave your wands, your instruments, and your bounded fields behind. You will come with empty hands and an open mind. And you will show the proper respect. Choose." The offer was ludicrous. It was insane. Walking into the lair of a Gorgon, unarmed and unprotected, was suicide. Every instinct for self-preservation, every rule of the Mages Association, screamed at her to refuse, to retreat to a safe distance and call for reinforcements. But the scholar in her, the relentless seeker of knowledge that defined her very being, was captivated. An audience with a living divine spirit from the age of gods. A chance to learn the truths behind the myths. It was a discovery that would not just elevate her status, it would rewrite the history of magic itself. And the man before her, this impossible sage, who spoke with the authority of a forgotten god, he was the greatest mystery of all. She weighed the risk against the reward, her life against the greatest discovery in 1,000 years. For a true mage of the clock tower, there was no real choice at all. "I accept your terms," Alara Vane said, her voice steady, her flint-gray eyes burning with a cold, intellectual fire. With a flick of her wrist, she deactivated the bounded field on the beach. She unstrapped her satchel and let it fall to the ground. She took the 7 silver rings from her hand and placed them carefully atop it. She stood before him, stripped of all her tools and defenses. Clad only in her coat and her unshakable academic resolve. "Lead the way," she said. Naruto gave a single, approving nod. He turned and began walking back up the mountain path, not once looking back to see if she was following. He knew she would be. The lure of the unknown was the most potent bait of all for a mind like hers. As he led the silver-haired mage through the silent, weeping forest of stone, Naruto reached out with his senses to the cavern, to the coiled, anxious being waiting within. "A guest is coming," he projected, not in words, but in a wave of pure, calming intent. "She is a scholar, not a warrior. She is afraid, but she is brave. She means us no immediate harm. Receive her as a queen would receive a foreign envoy. With dignity, with restraint. Show her the survivor, not the monster." He felt Gorgon's turbulent emotions in response. Shock, fury, fear, and beneath it all, a deep, trembling uncertainty. But he also felt a flicker of something else, her resolve. Her choice to trust him. The stage was set. The modern world, in the form of a brilliant, ambitious mage, was about to come face to face with the ancient world, in the form of a wounded, monstrous goddess. And in the middle stood the sage, a bridge between two eras, hoping to turn a collision into a conversation. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Audience of Stone and Silver. The Journey Up the Mountain Wall. S.A. Silent Masterclass in Psychological Warfare, though Alara Vane was certain her guide intended it as no such thing. The man, the self-proclaimed sage, moved with an impossible, weightless grace. His simple robes undisturbed by the howling wind or the driving rain. For Alara, a woman whose entire life was dedicated to the precise calculation and expenditure of magical energy, his very existence was an infuriating, terrifying paradox. To repel the storm's effects so effortlessly should have required a constant, massive output of prana, a shimmering aura of visible power. Yet her own senses, honed to detect the faintest thaumaturgical whisper, registered nothing from him but a deep, placid well of potential, like a dormant volcano. It was the magic of being, not doing, a concept so antique and antithetical to modern magecraft that it made her teeth ache. Her own journey was a stark contrast. Though the sage's presence seemed to subtly quell the storm in their immediate vicinity, the island itself still pressed in on her. The air was thick, not merely with humidity, but with a palpable miasma of pure, unadulterated mystery. It felt like walking through a liquid atmosphere of raw, undiluted curse energy. Every breath was a struggle, a conscious effort to filter the ambient despair through her own carefully maintained internal circuits. To a normal human, this place would be a fast track to madness. To a magus like Alara, it was like being locked in a library where every book was screaming in agony. And then there were the statues. She had analyzed them from a distance, but up close, their horror was intimate. They were not mere stone. Her trained eye could see the faint, frozen traces of magic circuits in a man's arm, the terror-locked rictus of a phantasmal beast's jaw. The sheer quality of the petrification. This was not a simple alteration of matter. It was a conceptual enforcement of stasis, a high-level curse that operated on the level of absolute reality. The power required to enact it, and to sustain it across an entire island for millennia, was a figure her mind refused to calculate. These were not just warnings, they were axioms, proofs of the goddess's terrible power. Her decision to come here unarmed felt less like courage and more like a profound, perhaps fatal, lapse in academic judgment. Finally, they reached the mouth of the cavern. It was a wound in the mountainside, a portal into absolute blackness. The ambient pressure of the island's curse intensified tenfold, a physical weight that made her want to retch. The air that drifted out was ancient, carrying the scent of deep earth, ozone, and something else, a coppery, metallic tang that spoke of old blood and a venom so potent it stained the very air. "She is within," the sage stated, his voice as calm as if he were announcing the arrival of a guest for tea. "Remember your promise, scholar. Empty hands, open mind." Alara swallowed, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. She squared her shoulders, the tailored lines of her coat a flimsy armor of professionalism against the primordial terror that awaited. "My purpose is the acquisition of knowledge, not conflict. I will conduct myself accordingly," she replied, her voice a marvel of forced composure. She followed him into the darkness. The transition was jarring. For a few steps, she was blind, her senses overwhelmed by the oppressive gloom and the chilling cold. Then, her eyes adjusted, and she saw what she could never have predicted. It was not the foul, gore-strewn lair of a monster. In the center of the vast, echoing cavern was an oasis of soft, blue-white light, emanating from a complex, glowing pattern of runes inscribed on the floor. Within this circle, the air was warm, clean, and still. A pool of water at its edge sparkled with impossible purity. It was a sanctuary, a pocket of impossible order carved into the heart of primordial chaos. It was the most sophisticated bounded field she had ever witnessed, yet it felt organic. Alive, a stark contrast to the rigid, geometric constructs of modern magecraft. And upon a throne-like formation of natural black rock, just beyond the circle of light, was the goddess. The collected knowledge of the clock tower, the countless texts, scrolls, and spiritual recordings she had studied, had not prepared her for the reality of the Gorgon. She was immense, a creature of terrifying scale. Her lower serpentine body, covered in scales of polished obsidian, was coiled in a series of muscular loops that could have crushed a fortress. Her upper torso was that of a woman, but a woman forged from nightmare and divine beauty in equal measure. Her skin had the pale, luminous quality of moonlight on a tombstone, and her arms, ending in claws of razor-sharp keratin, were tensed with the potential for sudden, shocking violence. Her hair was a living, writhing nest of pale vipers, their myriad golden eyes all fixing upon Alara in a silent, multifaceted stare of pure malevolence. But it was her face, her eyes, that held the true terror. It was a face of impossible, tragic beauty, framed by the horror of her serpentine locks. And her eyes, which she thankfully kept half-lidded, glowed with a soft, golden light that promised oblivion. Alara felt the gaze not on her skin, but on her very soul, a terrible pressure that threatened to arrest the flow of time within her own body. This was the Cybele, the mystic eyes of petrification, and even in their passive state, they were the most powerful magical phenomenon she had ever personally encountered. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her every instinct, every fiber of her training as a magus, screamed at her to erect a defensive barrier, to cast 1,000 curses, to run. But she did nothing. She stood her ground, her body rigid, her mind a whirlwind of terror and exhilaration. She was here. She was in the presence of a living god from a forgotten age. The sage, Naruto, did not stand beside her. He moved to the edge of the light, positioning himself between her and the Gorgon, a clear but unobtrusive mediator. "Queen of the Shapeless Isle," he began, his voice imbued with a formal, resonant respect. "I have brought you a visitor. This is Alara Vane, a scholar of the New Age. She has come with questions, not weapons, and has sworn to offer you the respect due to your station. She seeks to understand, not to conquer." Gorgon's massive head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement. The sound of her scales shifting was like a minor rockslide. Her golden eyes opened a fraction more, and Alara felt the petrifying pressure increase, a tingling numbness starting in her extremities. "A scholar." Gorgon's voice was a chorus of grinding stones and venomous hisses, a sound that vibrated deep in Alara's bones. "The last scholars to visit my home carried swords that wept with the blood of my sisters. Why should I believe she is any different?" The raw, ancient hatred in that voice was a tangible force. Alara knew her response was critical. It would set the tone for this entire, impossible encounter. She drew upon every ounce of her formal training at the clock tower, the endless lessons in etiquette for dealing with powerful spiritual entities. Great Gorgon, divine spirit of the Aegean, Alara began, her voice tight but clear, her words precise. I cannot speak for the heroes of your age. The thaumaturgical principles of my era are founded upon observation and systemization, not conquest. My only sword is my intellect. My only shield is my curiosity. I cannot deny that my organization would view you as a threat to be managed, but I am here, unarmed, as proof that I am willing to pursue a different path. I am here to listen to the truth that lies behind the legend. It was a good speech, she thought. Respectful, honest, for the most part. It framed her actions in a way a being of a different era might understand. For a long moment, the cavern was silent save for the soft hum of the sage's warming seal. Gorgon studied her, and Alara felt as if her entire life, her mind, her very soul were being weighed, measured, and found wanting. You speak of truth, the Gorgon hissed. The truths of your kind are fleeting, written on paper that rots and in memories that fade. My truth is written in stone. It surrounds you. She gestured with a clawed hand to the silent, frozen figures lining the cavern walls. Ask your questions, scholar. And be mindful that my patience is far, far older than your civilization, but it is not infinite. Permission. She had been granted permission. The academic in her roared to the forefront, momentarily eclipsing her fear. She had 1,000 questions, 1,000,000 data points she wished to gather. She had to start somewhere fundamental. Your curse, Alara said, forcing herself to maintain a clinical, respectful tone. The legends attribute it to the goddess Athena. From a thaumaturgical standpoint, the transformation of a divine spirit into your current form would require an authority and an energy expenditure on a conceptual level that is almost unheard of. Was it a single, cataclysmic act, or a gradual alteration of your saint graph, your spiritual core? It was a good, safe, academic question. And it was utterly the wrong one to ask. Gorgon's form tensed, a low growl rumbling in her chest that made the very stone beneath Alara's feet vibrate. The vipers in her hair rose, their hisses sharp and angry. The golden glow of her eyes intensified. You ask how the executioner's axe was forged, the goddess snarled, her voice dripping with sudden, venomous rage. You do not ask how it felt as it fell upon my neck. You see a grand spell, a thaumaturgical principle. I see the face of a jealous goddess, her eyes fill ed with petty satisfaction as she tore my life apart. You see a saint graph. I see my own reflection in the water, the face of a monster I did not ask to become. The temperature in the cavern plummeted. The comforting warmth of the sage's seal was suddenly fighting a losing battle against a wave of pure, chilling despair. Alara felt the full force of the Gorgon's killing intent wash over her, a tsunami of psychic pressure that made her knees buckle. Her vision swam. The tingling numbness in her limbs was becoming a painful ache. She was going to die. She was going to be another statue in this gallery of the damned. Before the petrification could take hold, before Gorgon's rage could become a physical attack, the sage moved. He did not leap or draw a weapon. He simply took one step forward, placing himself more fully between them, and the wave of killing intent seemed to break against his calm presence as if it were a seawall. Enough, Naruto said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the Gorgon's rage with the finality of a closing door. He turned his head slightly, his gaze still on Gorgon but his words directed at Alara. You cannot view the sun as a mere nuclear reaction and expect to understand its warmth. Scholar, you have asked about the how. You have forgotten to ask about the why. You have shown her the mind of a scientist where she needed to see the heart of a listener. Then he looked back to Gorgon, and his tone softened, losing its edge of command and taking on the gentle, understanding quality she was beginning to recognize. Heilani, he said. The name was soft, melodic. A language far older than Greek, a word that felt like it meant heavenly slumber, or peaceful sky. It was a name so far removed from Gorgon, or Medusa, that it hung in the air, a beautiful, impossible sound. This one is young. Her world has traded wisdom for information. She does not know how to ask the right questions. Teach her. Do not break her. The use of that name, whatever it was, had a stunning effect. The Gorgon's rage did not vanish, but it receded, pulling back like a tide. The killing pressure lessened, and Alara found she could breathe again. The vipers in her hair settled, and her golden eyes, though still burning with a deep, sorrowful anger, lost their immediate, murderous focus. She stared at the sage, a complex, unreadable emotion swirling in their depths. "You have no right to use that name," she whispered, but the venom was gone, replaced by a profound, ancient pain. "A name is a symbol of what one is," Naruto replied gently. "For too long, you have been only Gorgon, the monster. It is time to remember the other names you have carried." He turned back to Alara, his expression stern. "You have your answer, scholar." Her curse was not a neat taumaturgical equation. It was an act of cruelty. An injustice. That is the only data point that truly matters. Do you have another question? One that comes from a place of seeking to understand a person, not a phenomenon. Alara was shaking. She had faced down rogue homunculi, contained rampaging wraiths, and bound rogue spirits. She had never, in her entire career, felt so close to utter, absolute annihilation. And she had never been so thoroughly dismantled on an intellectual level. The sage was right. She had approached this as a problem to be solved, a specimen to be analyzed. She had forgotten that the specimen was a thinking, feeling being who had endured millennia of torment. She took a shaky breath, her mind racing. She needed a new question. A better one. One that acknowledged the person, the goddess, behind the monster. "My apologies, great goddess," she said, her voice trembling slightly but sincere. She bowed her head in a gesture of genuine respect. "My methodology is ill-suited to your reality. Forgive my clinical approach." She looked up, meeting the Gorgon's gaze as bravely as she could. "The sage spoke of your sisters. The legends say they were immortal, and you were not. And yet, you are the one who remains. To have outlived those you loved, and to have done so in this enforced solitude, I cannot comprehend the depth of that sorrow. How have you endured it?" This question, born of a sudden, shocking wave of empathy, changed the atmosphere in the cavern completely. The Gorgon's expression, which had been a mask of cold fury, softened, crumbling into something that looked agonizingly like grief. The vipers in her hair drooped, their small heads bowing in shared sorrow. "Endured," the goddess whispered, her voice cracking. "I have not endured. I have merely persisted. My rage at the injustice of their deaths, and my hatred for the gods who orchestrated it, was the fuel that burned in place of a soul. I honored their memory. By becoming the monster the world believed me to be, a living monument to their sacrifice. Every hero I turned to stone was a new headstone in the graveyard of my heart. It is a hollow existence. A single, crystalline tear, like the one Naruto had first witnessed, traced a path down her pale cheek and shattered on the stone below. The sound was deafening in the sudden, profound silence. Alara stared, her scientific mind completely silent for the first time in her adult life. She was witnessing the raw, unguarded grief of a goddess. This was a truth that could never be quantified, a piece of knowledge that could never be published in a clock tower journal. It was a revelation, a holy and terrible thing to behold. Naruto watched them both, a silent, approving presence. The conversation had shifted. The scholar had seen past the monster. The queen had shown a glimpse of her wounded heart. A fragile, impossible bridge of understanding was being built in the heart of the storm. He let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. Then he spoke, his voice gentle but firm, drawing the audience to a close. "That is enough for one day. The queen is tired. You have your answer, Alara Vane. You have seen that there is more to this island than a Category X threat. There is a history, a tragedy, a person." He walked towards Alara and gestured for her to follow him towards the cavern entrance. "Go back to your masters at the clock tower," he said as they walked, his voice too low for the Gorgon to hear. "Tell them what you have seen. Tell them that the shapeless isle is under new protection. It is no longer a prison to be quarantined, but a sanctuary to be respected. Any further attempts to probe, analyze, or assault this island will be met not by a lonely monster, but by its sage consort. And I am far less patient than she is." The implicit threat was delivered with the same calm, unshakable certainty he did everything else, and it was more terrifying than any scream of rage. Alara nodded, her mind still reeling. She glanced back one last time. The Gorgon, Heilani, had not moved, but she had lowered her head, her serpentine hair hiding her face. Shish. He looked less like a monster and more like a figure from a great tragedy, a queen mourning her lost kingdom. The audience was over. Alara Vane had come seeking data, and she was leaving with a truth that would shake the foundations of her. Chapter 5. A Report of Whispers and Steel. The departure of the silver-haired scholar left a silence in the cavern that was fundamentally different from the one that had preceded it. The millennia of solitude had been a heavy, suffocating blanket of absolute quiet. This new silence was a space, a pause between notes in a song that had just begun. It was filled with the echo of Alara's trembling voice, the ghost of Gorgon's own pained confession, and the steady, unobtrusive presence of the sage who had orchestrated it all. Gorgon, or Heilani, as he had named her in that critical moment, remained with her head bowed, the writhing curtain of her serpentine hair obscuring her expression. The single, shattered tear on the obsidian floor seemed to catch the blue light of the warming seal, a tiny, fractured star of sorrow. For the first time in an age, she had spoken her truth to an outsider and had not been met with a sword. She had been met with a clinical, detached curiosity that had ignited her rage, but that rage had been tempered, redirected, and ultimately soothed, not by violence, but by a quiet word and a forgotten name. The experience was disorienting, like waking from a 1,000-year nightmare into a world whose rules she no longer understood. Naruto did not press her. He moved with that silent, purposeful grace of his, tending to the fuinjutsu array on the floor. With a few deft hand signs and a gentle press of his palm to the central rune, he channeled a fresh wave of his own energy into the construct. The blue light brightened, the comforting warmth intensified, pushing back the cavern's oppressive chill more effectively than before. He was reinforcing the sanctuary, making it more permanent, a clear, unspoken statement that this pocket of peace was not a temporary reprieve, but a new foundation. Finally, without lifting her head, Heilani spoke. Her voice, stripped of its earlier rage, was a low, rough whisper, like stone grinding together at the bottom of a deep sea. Heilani, where did you hear that name? Naruto straightened, turning to face her. It is not a name I heard. It is a name I perceived, he explained, his voice gentle. When I first connected with your being, beneath the layers of rage and curse and despair, I felt a core of stillness. A longing for peace, for a quiet sky after an endless storm. The name is a reflection of that core. It is as much a part of you as the curse is. You have simply forgotten it. It was the name my mother called me, she admitted, the words barely audible. Before everything, I had not thought of it I cannot count the years. To speak of her mother, of a time before her divinity, before Poseidon, before Athena, was to exhume a part of herself she had believed long dead and buried. Slowly, ponderously, she raised her head. The anger in her golden eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, profound exhaustion and a raw, shimmering vulnerability. She looked at the circle of light, at the man who stood within it, who had faced her fury without flinching and had answered her pain with a forgotten piece of her own soul. He had not lied. He was not here to slay her, or to steal from her, or to pity her. He was here to help. The concept was still so alien, she could not fully grasp it. With a motion that was hesitant, almost timid, she uncoiled a port ion of her massive serpentine body and slithered forward, stopping at the very edge of the glowing fuinjutsu circle. The warmth washed over her scales, a comforting caress. For days she had watched this space, this island of tranquility he had created in the heart of her misery. Now, she made a choice. She lowered her upper body, her claws retracting slightly, and for the first time, she deliberate. Ely rested a part of herself within the sanctuary's bounds. It was a small gesture, the crossing of a line, but in the silent history of the shapeless isle, it was an event of seismic significance. It was an act of trust. Naruto offered her a small, genuine smile. Rest, Heilani. You have carried the weight of this island for too long. For tonight, at least, let me stand the watch. Heilani did not reply. She simply closed her monstrous, beautiful eyes, and for the first time in millennia, she did not retreat into a sleep haunted by rage and nightmares, but into a state of quiet, guarded repose. Warmed by a light she had never thought to feel again. London was a cacophony. After the profound, Elemental silence of the shapeless isle, the city assaulted Alara Vane's senses. Even in the pre-dawn hours, it was a riot of noise and energy. The rumble of the underground, the distant wail of a siren, the low hum of a million sleeping electronic devices. But for Magus, the true noise was on a different frequency. The city was a palimpsest of layered bounded fields, centuries of wards, curses, and enchantments laid one on top of the other. The very air in certain old districts was thick with the residue of spent spells. The scent of ozone, dried herbs, and ancient parchment clinging to the damp brickwork. It was the smell of human magic, clever, intricate, powerful, but utterly lacking the world-shaking, primordial grandeur of the power she had just left behind. She stood on a small, wrought iron balcony overlooking a rain-slicked cobblestone street near Borough Market, a location that served as one of the many mundane fronts for the clock tower's sprawling, hidden campus. A cup of meticulously brewed, magically warm tea was growing cold in her hands. She hadn't slept. Sleep was an impossibility. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the glowing gold of the Gorgon's gaze, felt the psychic pressure of her rage, and heard the impossible name the sage had spoken, Heilani. Her report was already submitted, sent via a secure arcane familiar, a small, clockwork bird that flew through the spirit paths connecting the clock tower's facilities. It was a dry, clinical report, detailing the nature of the island's bounded field, the confirmation of the divine spirit's existence, and the encounter with the unidentified entity designating himself as Sage Consort. She had, against her better judgment, omitted the more personal details. The goddess's tears, the story of her sisters, her own profound, terrifying moment of empathy. Such things were not data. They were sentiment, and sentiment had no place in the cold, logical world of the Mages Association. A chime, like a single, perfectly tuned crystal glass being struck, sounded in her mind. A summons. She had been granted an audience. Lord Valerius, head of the Department of Policies, would see her. This was a faster response than she had anticipated, and a more high-level one. Her discovery was already making waves. The interior of the clock tower was a world of cold marble, echoing footsteps, and oppressive history. Ancient tapestries depicting the founding of the association and great magical feats of ages past lined the halls. The air was chilled to a precise temperature, meant to preserve the ancient artifacts and, perhaps, to discourage lingering. Alara's heels clicked with sharp, metronomic précis ion as she walked toward Lord Valerius's office, a place few of her rank were ever invited. The office was vast, its walls lined with bookshelves that stretched up into the shadows of a vaulted ceiling. The books were not for reading. They were artifacts, grimoires bound in human skin and dragon hide, their very presence warping the local reality. The air smelled of old leather and condescension. Lord Valerius sat behind a massive desk carved from a single piece of petrified oak, his spidery fingers steepled before him. He was a man who looked as ancient and brittle as the scrolls piled neatly on his desk. His face a roadmap of political maneuvering and arcane discipline. Magus Vane, he began, his voice the dry rustle of turning pages. He did not invite her to sit. I have read your report. It is sensational. The word was not a compliment. It is factual, my lord, Alara replied, her voice a model of professional decorum. Factual, Valerius mused, picking up a printed copy of her report with a dismissive air. You report the existence of a stable, self-sustaining dimensional fault anchored by a Category X divine spirit. Troubling, but within the realm of possibility. You then report that this fault is guarded by a bounded field of a style and complexity that you, one of our foremost experts, cannot identify. Highly improbable. And then, he let the report drop onto his desk with a soft thud. You claim to have encountered a man. A single man, who calls himself a sage, who has single-handedly pacified this divine spirit and claimed the entire territory as his sovereign domain. That, Magus Vane, is not factual. It is the fanciful raving of a researcher who has been exposed to a high-level mental interference field. Alara's jaw tightened. My lord, with all due respect, my mental fortitude is beyond question. I have included the readings from my familiars. The energy signature of the male entity is quantifiable. It is real. It is astronomical. A clever illusion, then. A trick of the light. Valerius waved a dismissive hand. The conclusion is obvious. The Gorgon has evolved. It has developed a new, sophisticated method of luring its victims. A psychic projection, a puppet to disarm intruders before it turns them to stone. Your survival was a matter of pure, dumb luck. You were a novelty it chose to release to spread its new lure. This was the institutional dogma she had feared. The inability to conceive of a reality that did not fit their existing models. He was not a projection, my lord. I staked my life on that fact. The Gorgon is no longer the solitary, raging beast of legend. She is, under his protection. She is changing. I believe a diplomatic approach, a period of extended, non-invasive observation. Diplomacy. Valerius's dry voice, CE was suddenly sharp as shattered glass. We do not conduct diplomacy with natural disasters, Magus Vane. We do not negotiate with typhoons. A divine spirit from the age of gods is a weapon of mass destruction. A font of mystery that must be controlled, contained, and if necessary, dismantled for the security of the modern world and the jurisdictional integrity of the Mages Association. Your recommendation is denied. He made a small, precise gesture in the air, and a magic circle flared to life beside his desk. Your report, however, has elevated this matter from a research curiosity to a level 4 security threat. Containment protocols must be enacted. We require a more robust investigation. From the circle of light, a figure emerged. Alara felt her presence before she saw her, a wave of contained heat. The scent of ozone and battle, the thrumming energy of a warrior mage at peak readiness. The newcomer was a tall woman, leanly muscled, with a cascade of fiery red hair tied back in a practical, thick braid. She wore not the formal robes of a clock tower academic, but a dark, reinforced combat tunic over leather trousers, her feet clad in scuffed, steel-toed boots. A massive, two-handed claymore, its hilt wrapped in worn leather and its length wrapped in protective runes, was strapped to her back. Her eyes were the color of a stormy sea, and they scanned the room with a sharp, predatory awareness that made Alara feel like a sheltered scholar by comparison. Enforcer Kalen, reporting as summoned, the woman said, her voice a low, musical alto with a faint, lilting cad. Ence that marked her as coming from one of the Celtic clan territories in the north. Ah, Kalen, Lord Valerius said, a thin, patronizing smile on his lips. He gestured towards Alara. This is Magus Vane. She has just returned from the location I briefed you on. She believes the target is holding conversations and is open to diplomacy. Kalen's stormy eyes flickered to Alara, her expression unreadable but carrying a faint, undeniable air of disdain for the very concept of diplomacy. Is it strong? She asked, her question directed at Valerius but her gaze locked on Alara. It was the only question that mattered to her. Magus Vane's familiars recorded an energy reading that, if accurate and not the result of interference, would place the male entity, the Sage, at the highest levels of power we have ever recorded. Valerius stated. A flicker of interest sparked in Kalen's eyes. Good, she said, the single word conveying a savage satisfaction. Your mission, Enforcer, is twofold, Valerius continued, his voice all business. Primary objective. Ascertain the true nature of this Sage. Determine if he is a puppet, an illusion, or a genuine entity. If he is an entity, assess his strengths, his weaknesses, and his threat level. Secondary objective. Re-establish the quarantine. No one enters, and nothing leaves. You are authorized to use escalating force as required to achieve these objectives. Magus Vane will provide you with the exact coordinates and all of her environmental data. And the Gorgon? Kalen asked, her hand resting almost unconsciously on the hilt of her sheathed claymore. A secondary concern for now. A known quantity, Valerius dismissed. Focus on the new variable. The unknown. Take your team. Be prepared for anything. Report back within 48 hours. Kalen gave a sharp, single nod. Understood. She turned her stormy gaze back to Alara. I'll need the data within the hour. It was not a request. With another nod to the Lord, she turned and strode out of the office, her powerful, confident steps a stark contrast to the quiet, academic atmosphere of the place. She was a weapon, and she had just been aimed. Alara stood frozen, a cold dread seeping into her. She had come to report a miracle, a chance for understanding, for a peaceful resolution. And the clock tower's response was to send in the enforcers. to send in Kaelin, a woman known for her devastating power and her tendency to solve problems by cleaving them in two. She had tried to prevent a war, and she had just handed its architects the map. On the shapeless isle, the storm had finally broken. For the first time in centuries, a sliver of pale, watery moonlight broke through the perpetual cloud cover, bathing the petrified forest in an eerie, silver light. Within the cavern, the only illumination was the soft, steady blue of the Fuinjutsu seal. Heilani slept, her massive form coiled peacefully within the circle of warmth, her vipers still. It was a fragile, tentative peace, but it was real. Naruto sat cross-legged near the cavern entrance, his eyes closed, his senses extended not outwards to the world, but inwards, into the very heart of the island. He was listening to the stone, feeling the slow, ancient pulse of its life. He was mapping the ley lines, understanding the intricate web of curses and sorrow that gave this place its unique, terrible power. He was learning his new domain. Then, his eyes snapped open. His senses, which had been peacefully mapping the island's interior, were suddenly assaulted by a sharp, violent intrusion from the outside. It was not the delicate, analytical probe of Alara Vane. This was a sledgehammer. 3 distinct energy signatures, moving with incredible speed, had just breached the outer layers of his cloaking field. They weren't trying to understand it. They were simply tearing through it with brute force. One signature burned with a fierce, contained heat, like a forest fire disciplined into the shape of a woman. The other 2 were colder, more rigid, but no less powerful, the synchronized signatures of trained combat mages. They were moving in a classic 3-pronged assault formation. They were hunters. He rose to his feet, his expression calm. But a dangerous, ancient light now glowed in the depths of his cerulean eyes. He glanced back at the sleeping form of the goddess he had sworn to protect. The world had made its choice. The age of man had sent its regards. So, Naruto Uzumaki whispered to the encroaching darkness, a small, grim smile touching his lips. The children of the new age have come to test the locks on the cage. Let's see if they remember what happens when they find a sage standing in their way. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Enforcer's Dance. The landing was a violation. Kaelin's steel-toed boots crunched onto the black sand with a sound that was deliberately, unapologetically solid. Where Alara Vane had approached the shapeless isle with the hesitant touch of a scholar, Len and her team arrived with the percussive impact of a breaching charge. The air, thick with ancient sorrow, met the disciplined, crackling auras of 3 elite combat mages and recoiled like a startled animal. The perpetual storm seemed to intensify, the wind hissing a venomous welcome through the petrified trees. Kaelin ignored it. To her, the oppressive atmosphere was just another environmental hazard, a factor to be noted, logged, and overcome. Marcus, perimeter wards, full defensive array, anti-divinity reinforcement, she commanded, her voice a clipped alto that cut cleanly through the wind's howl. Lena, active scrying. I want a full spectrum sweep of all spiritual and physical signatures within a 2-kilometer radius. Prioritize the anomalous male entity from Vane's report. Her 2 squadmates moved with the synchronized, fluid efficiency of a unit that had fought and bled together for years. Marcus, a broad-shouldered man with a stoic, bearded face, slammed the butt of a heavy silver staff onto the sand. A wave of cobalt blue energy radiated outwards, sinking into the ground and creating a shimmering, 30-meter dome of protective magic around their landing zone. The runes that flared to life within the barrier were stark, angular, and brutally functional, the architectural language of modern defensive warfare. Lena, a smaller, leaner woman with sharp eyes and an Arvu energy that belied her incredible magical precision, was already weaving a complex pattern in the air with her fingers, a cat's cradle of glowing silver threads that expanded outwards, a sensory net designed to map the battlefield. Kaelin herself stood at the center of their new beachhead, her hand resting on the leather-wrapped hilt of the massive claymore on her back. She drew in a slow, deep breath, tasting the air. Salt, ozone, and the deep, pervasive rot of a powerful, festering curse. But beneath it all, she could feel it. The sheer, intoxicating density of the mystery that saturated this place. It was like standing at the bottom of an ocean of pure magical potential. A place like this could forge legends or break them. The thought sent a thrill, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, down her spine. Report, she said, her stormy eyes scanning the menacing, silent forest before them. Perimeter secure. Marcus grunted, his staff now glowing with a steady, watchful light. The ambient curse energy is corrosive. The wards will need a constant power feed. This place, it's actively hostile. I'm getting chaos, Lena reported, her brow furrowed in concentration, her silver web of scrying magic flickering erratically. The entire island is a storm of conflicting signatures. It's like trying to listen to a whisper in a hurricane. But, wait, her eyes widened. I have a single point of stillness. About 800 meters inland, up the slope of that central peak. It's not an absence of energy, it's a perfect balance. It's him, the sage. He's not hiding his signature. He's waiting. A slow, predatory smile touched Kalen's lips. Good. She preferred an enemy who faced her. Forget the Gorgon for now. All units, converge on the sage's position. Tactical formation Gamma. Marcus, you're on point with me. Lena, rear guard, counter spell support. Move out. They advanced into the petrified forest, a tight, triangular wedge of modern magical might cutting into the ancient gloom. They moved like wolves, their senses sharp, their power coiled and ready to be unleashed. The stone statues of heroes and monsters watched their passage with silent, eternal terror, but Kalen paid them no mind. They were history. She was here to deal with the present. As they moved deeper, the feeling of being watched intensified. It was not the vague, malevolent presence of the island itself, but something far more focused, intelligent, and impossibly ancient. Then, the world changed. The howling wind did not die down, it simply ceased to be. The driving rain, which had been pelting them relentlessly, stopped in midair, the droplets hanging suspended in the silver moonlight like a field of tiny, frozen jewels. The oppressive pressure of the island's curse lifted, not vanishing, but being pushed back. Held at bay by a superior, tranquil force. The very air grew still, silent, and heavy with anticipation. Lena gasped, her scrying web shattering into a million points of harmless light. His bounded field, it's not a barrier. He just expanded his influence. The entire forest is his territory now. And there, standing on a flat, moss-covered outcrop of rock 100 feet ahead of them, was the man. Naruto. He wore the same simple, dark robes Alara had described, his posture relaxed, his hands tucked into his sleeves. He looked utterly unremarkable, yet the absolute authority with which he controlled the environment around them was a display of power more profound than any explosive spell. He had not built a fortress to keep them out, he had simply claimed the entire battlefield as his own living room. That's far enough, Enforcer. Naruto's voice was calm, carrying through the preternatural stillness without effort. I offered the scholar a choice. As you have come with swords drawn, I will offer you a different one. Lay down your weapons, and I will answer your questions. Persist, and I will disarm you. The outcome will be the same. Only the path you take to it is in question. Kalen's smile widened. No tricks, no projections, just a man and a challenge. This she understood. Brave words for a man standing alone, she called back, her hand closing fully around the hilt of her claymore. We are enforcers of the Mages Association. We don't have questions. We have objectives. With a sound like tearing leather, she drew her claymore. The blade, a length of polished, rune-etched steel as long as she was tall, flared to life, wreathed in shimmering, incandescent flames. It was Clarent, the burning blade of the north, a mystic code of devastating power. The heat from it melted the suspended raindrops in a 10-foot radius around her. Objective 1. Assess your capabilities, she declared, her voice dropping into a battle-ready growl. Marcus. Bind him. Marcus slammed his staff down. The very earth beneath Naruto erupted. Chains of solidified shadow and cursed stone shot up, lashing out to ensnare him. Simultaneously, Lena completed a series of frantic, intricate gestures, launching a volley of shimmering, ice-blue lances of pure kinetic force at him from a flanking angle. It was a classic pincer attack, designed to immobilize and overwhelm. Naruto did not move, he simply stamped his foot. Not a powerful, earth-shattering stomp, but a soft, simple placement, as if setting his stance. A silent, invisible pulse of pure, natural energy radiated out from the point of contact. The shadow chains dissolved into harmless wisps of smoke a foot from his body. The stone constructs crumbled into fine dust. Lena's kinetic lances, upon entering his immediate vicinity, simply lost their momentum and their form, deconstructing into a shower of inert, glittering magical particles that drifted harmlessly to the ground. Silence. Kaelin and her team stared, momentarily stunned. He hadn't erected a barrier. He hadn't cast a counter spell. He had cancelled their magic. He had told their spells to simply stop existing, and they had obeyed. Kaelin's shock lasted only a heartbeat before it was consumed by a surge of warriors' excitement. So that's how it is, she breathed, her grip on Clarent tightening. Then I'll use something you can't unravel. She lunged. She moved with explosive, impossible speed, her body enhanced by years of reinforcement magic. She did not run across the ground. She launched herself, a blur of motion, ringed the 100 feet between them in the span of a single breath. The air screamed as she brought the flaming claymore down in a devastating overhead arc, the force of the blow enough to cleave the outcrop of rock in two. Naruto, for the first time, moved. He flowed backwards, a single, effortless step that seemed to defy physics, causing her blade to miss by a hair's breadth. The flaming sword rashed into the rock where he had been standing, and the entire outcrop exploded in a shower of molten stone and superheated steam. Kaelin was already transitioning into her next attack, a blindingly fast horizontal sweep. But Naruto was no longer there. He had moved to her left, his posture still relaxed, his hands still in his sleeves. He hadn't dodged so much as he had simply ceased to be in the path of her attack. "Your movements are strong," he commented, his voice as calm as if he were critiquing a dance recital. "But they are full of wasted energy. You fight the world around you. You should be moving with it. Less talking, more fighting." Kaelin roared, her frustration mounting. She launched into a furious, relentless flurry of attacks. Slashes, thrusts, sweeps, each one wreathed in fire. Each one powerful enough to level a building. She was a whirlwind of steel and flame, a virtuoso of destruction. And Naruto danced. He never took a step that was more than what was needed. He flowed around her attacks like water. His movements economical, fluid, and utterly perfect. He never met her blade. He never blocked. He was simply never where the attack was aimed. The ground around them was a cratered, scorched wasteland from her missed blows, but he remained untouched, his robes not even singed. It was a humiliating, infuriating display of absolute superiority. He wasn't fighting her. He was making her fight herself. "Hold him," she bellowed, breaking off her attack for a moment. Marcus, his face grim, began to chant, raising his staff. He was preparing a wide-area petrification spell, a nasty piece of earth magic designed to turn the very ground into a binding trap. Lena, meanwhile, was creating a complex matrix of light in the air, a containment field designed to severely limit mobility. Naruto glanced at them, a flicker of something that might have been disappointment in his eyes. He raised one hand from his sleeve and made a small, intricate gesture. The complex runic sequence that Marcus was building in his mind and channeling through his staff suddenly collapsed, the magical energy backlashing with a sharp crackle. Marcus cried out, staggering back, his staff smoking. At the same time, Lena's matrix of light simply unwove itself, the threads of energy turning limp and fading into nothing. "Your magic is built on a framework of rules and equations," Naruto said, his gaze returning to Kaelin. "You are trying to speak a sentence by painstakingly assembling the letters. I am speaking the language. Your framework does not apply here." Kaelin's face was a mask of furious disbelief. He was lecturing her. In the middle of a battle, he was lecturing her. The condescension, the sheer, effortless ease with which he had dismantled her team's efforts, had her past the point of professional fury and into a cold, personal rage. "Fine," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "No more equations. No more frameworks. Just this." She planted her feet, icing her greatsword in a two-handed grip, pointing its tip to the bruised, moonlit sky. The flames surrounding the blade died down, and in their place, a new energy began to gather. The runes etched into the steel began to glow with a blinding, white-hot intensity. The air around her grew thin, the temperature dropping rapidly as all ambient heat was drawn into the sword. This was her trump card, the ultimate expression of her power. A spell that bordered on true magic. By the sun's heart and the winter's bite, she roared, her voice ringing with power. I call upon the promised light, the spear that never misses its mark. Luft's spear of light. She thrust the sword forward. It did not project a blade of fire or a wave of force. A beam of pure, condensed, weaponized sunlight, hotter and a star's core and faster than thought, erupted from the tip of the claymore. It was not an attack, it was an annihilation, a line of absolute destruction drawn across the landscape. The very air it passed through was incinerated, leaving a vacuum in its wake. It was aimed directly at Naruto's heart. And Naruto, for the first time in the entire encounter, brought both hands out of his sleeves. He did not erect a shield. He did not try to dodge. He simply held his right palm forward, open, to meet the incoming apocalypse. The beam of light struck his palm. There was no explosion, no earth-shattering impact. There was only a profound, impossible silence. The beam of annihilation, the spear of a sun god, simply stopped. It did not splash against a barrier. It flowed into his hand, the incandescent light shrinking, compressing, being absorbed as if his palm were a miniature black hole. He stood there, unmoving, his expression serene, taking the full, unrestrained power of her ultimate attack and simply accepting it. He held it for a moment, a tiny, blindingly bright star contained within his hand. He looked at it, then at Kalin, whose face was a frozen mask of absolute, world-shattering shock. A beautiful light, he said, his voice quiet. But a light meant for destruction is a light that has lost its way. And then, he closed his hand. The star vanished. The light went out. The power was gone. He had not blocked it. He had not redirected it. He had unmade it. Kalin stood, her body trembling with exertion, her mana circuits screaming from the sudden, violent dissipation of her spell. Clarent, its power spent, was now just a heavy, inert piece of steel. She stared at the man, at his empty, unharmed hand, and for the first time in her life as a warrior, she understood. The concept of a gap in power that could not be crossed by will, or by strength, or by rage. It was the gap between a human and a god. Her knees buckled, and she fell to one knee, not in surrender, but from sheer soul-deep exhaustion and disbelief. Marcus and Lena were similarly stunned into inaction, their own formidable powers feeling like a child's parlor tricks in the face of what they had just witnessed. Naruto lowered his hand and tucked it back into his sleeve. He walked forward slowly, stopping a few feet from the kneeling, panting enforcer. The rain, released from his control, began to fall again, hissing on the scorched earth around them. Your strength is impressive, Enforcer Kalin, he said, his voice devoid of mockery or triumph. It was a simple statement of fact. But you were trying to shatter a mountain with a hammer. It is the wrong tool for the task. He looked down at her, his ancient, cerulean eyes holding not the gaze of a victor, but that of a teacher, a guide. Now, he said, his voice soft but resonant in the returning storm. Put down your hammer, and I will show you the mountain. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The weight of the mountain. The rain was no longer a tactical inconvenience. It was a final, quiet insult. It fell on Kalin's kneeling form, hissing against the still-hot metal of her pauldrons, tracing cold paths down her face that mingled with the sweat of exertion and the heat of her humiliation. The sheer, vibrant power that had coursed through her moments ago was gone, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion in her mana circuits and a profound, bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. Her hands, which could wield a 100-pound claymore like a fencing foil, trembled with the aftershock of her dissipated power. Clarent lay inert on the scorched earth beside her, a heavy, useless length of steel. It had never failed her before, because she had never before aimed it at a concept that could simply decide her attack was irrelevant. Marcus had a hand on Lena's shoulder, steadying her. She was pale, her face beaded with sweat, the backlash from having two complex spells simultaneously unraveled having taken a severe toll on her concentration. Marcus himself looked grim, his usual stoic expression replaced by one of deep, troubled apprehension. They were enforcers. They were the clock tower's final, definitive answer to problems that could not be solved by politics or research. They did not fail. They did not kneel, disarmed and exhausted, before a single, unarmed man. And yet, here they were. Naruto's final words, "I will show you the mountain," hung in the still air between them. It was not a threat. It was a promise, and that was infinitely more unsettling. What are you?" Kalin finally managed to ask, her voice a rough, strained whisper. She did not look up. Her pride, the bedrock of her identity as a warrior, would not allow it. "I am a sage," Naruto replied, his voice still holding that impossible calm. "My purpose is to seek balance. To understand the flow of the world and to help it heal where it is broken. And this place," he gestured to the petrified forest around them, "is a wound. A deep, festering wound left by the arrogance of gods and the ignorance of men." He took a slow step forward, his shadow falling over her. She tensed, her every muscle screaming to rise, to fight, to do something. But she was spent. There was nothing left in her to fuel the fire. "You came here as a weapon, Enforcer Kalin," Naruto continued, his voice soft, almost conversational. "You see a problem, and your instinct is to cut it. You see a fortress, and you seek to breach it. You have been taught that strength is the force required to break things. But there is another kind of strength. The strength to hold things together. The strength to endure. That is the strength this island's queen has shown for millennia. That is the mountain I wish you to see." Before she could process his words, before she could even formulate a reply, he moved. He knelt before her, not in a gesture of submission, but with the quiet grace of a teacher sitting down to instruct a student. He reached out a hand, his fingers gentle, and touched her forehead. He did the same to Marcus and Lena, who were too stunned by the speed and intimacy of the gesture to react. His touch was not cold, not hot. It was simply present. And then, the world dissolved. It was not a vision. It was a translation of the soul. There was no disorienting flash of light or dizzying spin. One moment, they were in the cold, rain-swept forest of stone. The next, they were the memory. The sun, the impossible warmth of a Grecian sun on perfect, flawless skin. The scent of salt from a brilliant, turquoise sea, and heady perfume of olive groves and temple incense. The sound of laughter. Two voices, bright and clear as silver bells, her sisters, Steno and Euryale. They are weaving flowers into her hair At is not a nest of vipers but a cascade of shining, dark silk. Mortals are gathered below their cliffside temple, their faces upturned in adoration, their prayers a warm, intoxicating balm to the spirit. This is what it is to be a goddess. To be beautiful, to be loved, to be complete. The sensation was so real, so absolute, that Kalin felt a phantom joy, a pang of pure, unadulterated happiness. So intense it made her own battle-hardened heart ache with a longing she had never known. Then the sensory palette shifted. The warmth was replaced by a sudden, chilling dread. The scent of incense was overwhelmed by the metallic, briny tang of a powerful, arrogant male god. Poseidon. His presence was not a request, but a demand, a force of nature that expected reality to bend to his will. The temple, Athena's sacred space, felt cold, violated. There was a moment of confusion, then terror, then a pain that was not merely physical, but a profound, spiritual desecration that tore at the very fabric of her being. Kalin, Marcus, and Lena felt it all, not as observers, but as participants. They felt the shame, the helplessness, the utter, soul-crushing despair of a goddess betrayed by her own kind. And then came Athena. Her arrival was not a comfort, but a second, colder violation. The memory conveyed not a righteous goddess, but a being of immense, petty jealousy and cold, unforgiving fury. Her words were not a judgment, but a curse, a high-level conceptual spell woven from spite. The transformation was an agony beyond description. They felt their bones shifting, lengthening, their lower limbs fusing into a powerful, serpentine coil. They felt the silken strands of their hair writhe, thicken, and become other, vipers, each with its own cold, hungry life. They felt their fingernails sharpen and harden into monstrous claws. But the worst part was the change in their eyes. They felt the power welling up, a terrible, golden light that was not a gift, but a damnation. A power that ensured they would never again see a loving face, only the terror-stricken mask of a new stone statue. The shared experience ripped a silent scream from the depths of their souls. The memory fast-forwarded, a blur of centuries of isolation on the dark, storm-racked island. They felt the grief of her sister's choice to join her in exile, a love so pure it was a constant, burning pain in the face of their monstrous new reality. And then they felt the heroes. The arrogant, glory-seeking men who came with shining swords and self-righteous justifications. They experienced the death of Euryale, not as a myth, but as a physical blow, the tearing of a part of their own soul. They felt Steno's desperate, final stand, and her death, another amputation of the spirit. And they felt the rage. Oh, the rage. It was a pure, black, incandescent thing, a supernova of grief and hatred that became the only thing left. They felt the grim, hollow satisfaction of watching the heroes turn to stone, each one a monument to her loss. A victory that tasted only of ash. Millennia passed in a subjective instant. Millennia of cold, of darkness, of solitude, of a rage that had burned so long it had forgotten its own source, becoming a state of being. They felt her pain when Naruto first touched her face, the shock of a warmth so alien it felt like being burned. They felt her confusion at his words of comfort. They felt her terror and her sliver of hope during Ilara's audience. They felt the mountain, the full, crushing weight of it. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. Kalin found herself on her hands and knees in the mud, gasping, tears she was not aware she had shed streaming down her face. Her heart was a jackhammer in her chest. The phantom pains of the transformation, the echoes of millennia of grief, still vibrated through her. Beside her, Marcus was slumped against a petrified tree, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a horrified understanding. Lena was curled on the ground, openly weeping, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. They were broken. The clock tower's finest weapon, broken not by force, but by a forced dose of absolute, undiluted empathy. Naruto stood before them, his expression one of profound, sorrowful compassion. He had not reveled in their pain, he had guided them through it, his own consciousness a steady, anchoring presence that had kept their minds from shattering under the strain. Now you see, he said, his voice soft. Now you understand. The being you were sent to contain is not a beast. She is a victim. She is a survivor. Her rage is not a flaw. It is the scar left by an unimaginable wound. This island is not a lair, it is a sanctuary she built from her own pain. Kalin pushed herself up, her movements stiff, clumsy. She looked at her hands, then at the silent stone forest. It was no longer a collection of tactical obstacles and environmental hazards. It was a graveyard, a memorial. Every frozen face held a story, but now he understood the story of the one who had put them there. We were sent to, she began, but the words of her mission sounded obscene now, hollow and brutish. Assess his capabilities, re-establish quarantine, use escalating force. They had come here to put chains on a woman who had already spent an eternity in a cage of divine cruelty. I know what you were sent to do, Naruto said. And I know you were only following orders. But orders born of ignorance led only to greater tragedy. He turned and began to walk back towards the cavern, his meaning clear. They were to follow, numbly, like automatons. Kalin and her team retrieved their fallen equipment. Kalin sheathed her claymore, the heavy blade feeling alien and crude in her grasp now. They followed the sage up the mountain path, His silence between them no longer one of military discipline, but of shared, staggering revelation. In his cold, silent office in London, Lord Valerius stared into a large, ornate silver mirror. The surface was not reflective but swirled with a dark, scrying mist. He had been observing the entire encounter. Or rather, he had been observing a distorted, incomplete version of it. His scrying familiar, a sophisticated spiritual probe keyed to Kalin's energy signature, could only transmit raw data, not context, not emotion. He had seen Kalin and her team engage the target. He had seen their spells fail, their attacks miss. He had seen Kalin unleash the full power of her blade, a power he knew could vaporize a city block. And he had seen the target absorb it. Then, the target had approached them. There was a period where the familiar's transmission became chaotic, a jumble of psychic noise and emotional feedback so intense it almost shattered the mirror. When the signal stabilized, he saw his enforcers, his elite warriors. Kneeling, disarmed, their auras in a state of utter disarray. He saw them follow the target meekly up the mountain. He leaned back in his chair, his spidery fingers tapping a slow, thoughtful rhythm on the petrified oak of his desk. His theory was confirmed. The failure of Alara Vane was not a fluke. The utter defeat of Kalen was not a matter of a simple power gap. A high-level, wide-area mental interference, he murmured to the empty room. A psychic attack that bypasses conventional wards and targets the will itself. It doesn't defeat the body, it corrupts the mind. It turns our own agents against us. He saw not a sage offering a lesson in empathy, but a monster with a terrifying new weapon. He saw not a tragedy that deserved respect, but a thria that had just proven itself capable of neutralizing his best assets. His cold, logical mind could not conceive of a power rooted in compassion. It could only categorize what he saw based on the established frameworks of magical warfare. And what he saw was the most dangerous type of enemy, an insidiously powerful subversive. The quarantine has failed, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. He made a new gesture over his desk, and a different communication circle flared to life, this one a deep, blood red. The objective is no longer containment. It is sterilization. When Kalen and her team reached the cavern, they stopped at the entrance, hesitating. The sheer pressure of the Gorgon's presence was still immense, but now it was colored by the profound, tragic understanding they had been given. They were no longer looking into the lair of a monster. They were standing at the threshold of a queen's throne room. Naruto stood in the circle of blue light, beside the peacefully sleeping form of Heilani. Her serpentine body was coiled within the warmth, a sight that would have been terrifying an hour ago but now looked, strangely peaceful. You have seen the truth of this place, Naruto said to the three enforcers. You have a choice. You can return to your masters and file a report of your failure, and they will send others. More powerful weapons. More destructive methods. The cycle of violence that has plagued this island will continue. Or, you can deliver a different message. You can tell them that what resides here is not a threat to be neutralized, but a history to be honored. You can be the first heroes in 1,000 years to come to this island and choose peace over war. Kalen looked at the sleeping goddess, then at the sage who guarded her. She thought of Lord Valerius, of his cold, calculating eyes, of the unbending dogma of the clock tower. He would never understand. He would see her report as proof of her corruption, not of the sage's truth. But her objective was no longer the one Valerius had given her. She had been sent to assess a threat. And she had found one. But the threat was not the sage or the Gorgon. The threat was the ignorance and arrogance of her own people. My report will state the facts, Kalen said, her voice finding its strength again, but with a new, different timbre. It was no longer the voice of a weapon, but of a witness. It will state that we were outmatched. Not by power, but by a principle we did not understand. It will state that any further aggression against this domain is not only tactically suicidal but morally bankrupt. She met Naruto's gaze, her stormy eyes clear and resolved. He won't listen. Lord Valerius will see it as a failure of his enforcers, not his philosophy. Perhaps, Naruto conceded. But a seed of truth, once planted, has a way of growing in the most unexpected places. You have seen the mountain, enforcer. Now, you must decide whether you will continue to try and break it, or if you will learn to walk its paths. He made a gesture, and the oppressive weight of the island's curse seemed to part, creating a clear, safe path from the cavern to the beach. Go, he said. Deliver your message. What comes next, we will face when it arrives. Without another word, Kalen nodded. She turned, her two squadmates falling into step behind her. They walked away from the cavern, their eye on a catastrophic failure and a profound, life-altering success. As she walked, Kalen knew one thing for certain. She could never again raise her sword against the Queen of the Shapeless Isle. Her hammer was broken, and she was finally, truly, seeing the mountain. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Chalice and the Blade. The walk back down the mountain was a silent, somber procession. Kalen, Marcus, and Lena moved through the silver-lit, rain-washed forest of stone, but they no longer saw it as a hostile environment. They saw it as a place of profound, sorrowful memory. Each petrified figure they passed was no longer a trophy of a monster but a gravestone laid by a grieving queen. The weight of the mountain, the crushing empathy the sage had forced upon them, had settled deep in their bones. A permanent alteration of their spiritual and psychological landscape. They had been sent as weapons, and they were returning as witnesses. Upon reaching the beach, Marcus dutifully and silently dismantled their defensive ward. The shimmering dome of cobalt energy collapsed with a soft chime, and the oppressive, raw curse energy of the island washed back over them. A few hours ago, it had felt like an attack. Now, it felt like a lament. Lena, her face pale and tear-streaked, created a small, shimmering bird of pure mana, a communication familiar designed for long-range, instantaneous delivery. She whispered her report into it, her voice cracking with an emotion that was utterly foreign to her usual, precise incantations. Then, with a flick of her wrist, the bird shot into the sky and vanished into the spirit dimension. A message of failure and revelation on its way to London. They did not speak on the journey back. There was nothing to say. Their shared experience was too vast, too personal to be contained in words. They had looked into the heart of a goddess's pain and had found a piece of their own humanity reflected there. When their silent, moon and obsidian craft docked in the hidden subterranean port beneath the clock tower, they disembarked not as a triumphant unit of enforcers, but as three changed people walking into a system that had no tolerance for change. The summons came, as Kalen knew it would, less than an hour later. Not to Lord Valerius's office, but to Debriefing Chamber 7 in the Department of Policies. This was a bad sign. The formal offices were for successes and strategic discussions. The debriefing chambers were for failures, security leaks, and recalibrations. It was a sterile, windowless room, the walls lined with psycho-absorbent alloys and faint, ever-present warding spells designed to suppress memory and will. Lord Valerius was not there in person. His image shimmered in the center of the room, a life-sized projection from a master crystal. He looked down at Kalen, who stood alone in the center of the room, her team having been taken to separate chambers. His expression was not one of anger, but of cold, clinical disappointment. Like a master craftsman examining a tool that had inexplicably broken. Your report was incoherent, Enforcer Kalen, he began, his dry voice echoing slightly in the sterile chamber. It was Phi-D with subjective emotional analysis and a complete failure to adhere to mission parameters. You were sent to assess and contain a threat. Instead, you were compromised. My lord, what we encountered was not what we were briefed on. Kalen stated, her voice steady. She had rehearsed this. She would give him the truth, however unpalatable. The entity known as the Sage does not utilize mental interference in the way we understand it. He does not attack the mind. He reveals the truth. The Gorgon is not a mindless beast. She is a victim of a divine injustice, and her power is a manifestation of her pain. Any aggressive action against her is not only futile, it is an act of profound cruelty. We were not defeated. We were educated. Valerius listened, his steepled fingers tapping together thoughtfully. An interesting distinction, he mused. And a terrifying one. An enemy who can make my finest warriors believe they are being educated is the most dangerous kind of subversive. You are proof that our direct action approach is flawed. Not because it is cruel, but because it is ineffective against this particular target's unique defensive capabilities. He sighed, a dry, rustling sound. You were a fine weapon, Kalen. It is a pity you have been so thoroughly blunted. The insult, which once would have sent a surge of fury through her, now felt hollow. He was right. A weapon is not supposed to question its target. And she was questioning everything. Your service as an enforcer is suspended indefinitely, Valerius declared, his voice final. You and your team will undergo a full spiritual and psychological cleansing to remove any lingering mental contamination. Once your loyalties and emotional stability have been reaffirmed, we will consider a new assignment for you. Spiritual and psychological cleansing, a euphemism for memory wiping and personality resculpting. They would take her experience, her revelation, her newfound conviction, and they would erase it, leaving behind only the compliant, unquestioning weapon she had once been. A cold dread, far more terrifying than any physical threat, washed over her. And the island? She asked, her voice tight. What is your new plan? A faint, cruel smile touched Valerius's lips. If a fortress cannot be taken by shattering its walls, then one must find a key that unlocks the gate from within. We have determined that the Sage's power is intrinsically linked to his role as Consort, his ability to pacify and channel the Gorgon's own immense power. Therefore, the logical course of action is to remove the source of that power. We will not attack the sage. We will eliminate the Gorgon. Kalen's blood ran cold. You can't. My report was clear. A direct assault. We will not be using a direct assault, Valerius interrupted. We will be using a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. His projection shimmered, and another figure materialized beside him. It was a woman, poised and elegant, with hair the color of spun moonlight and eyes the hue of twilight amethysts. She was clad in a form-fitting, silken combat gown of midnight blue, intricately embroidered with silver runes that seemed to drink the light. Her posture was one of serene, deadly grace, and she held a faint, polite smile that did not reach her eyes. Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. This was Seraphina Valerius, Lord Valerius's niece, and the infamous Chalice Blade of the Valerius family, a magus bred and trained from birth for a single purpose: high-level conceptual assassination. Enforcer Kalen, Seraphina said, her voice a soft, melodic whisper that was more chilling than any shout. A pleasure to finally meet the woman whose legend precedes her. A shame about the circumstances. Seraphina will be our key. Lord Valerius explained with an air of paternal pride. She will not be engaging in crude combat. Her task is to bypass the sage's defenses, approach the Gorgon, and deploy a unique conceptual weapon from our family's vaults, the Chalice of Lethe. It does not destroy the body, it erases the mind and spirit. It will return the divine spirit to a state of pure, inert mystery, a font of power without a will or a memory. The sage's shield will become a powerless husk, and the island's resources will be ours to claim and study at our leisure. It is an elegant, efficient, and final solution. Kalen stared in horror. They were going to lobotomize a goddess. They were going to inflict a final, ultimate violation upon a being who had known nothing but suffering. It was a plan of such calculated, soulless cruelty that it took her breath away. This is your final debriefing, Kalen, Lord Valerius said, his image beginning to fade. The cleansers will be with you shortly. Do try to be cooperative. The projections vanished, leaving Kalen alone in the cold, silent room. The single, hidden door hissed shut and locked, its magical seals glowing into life. She was a prisoner. She had failed. The truth she had brought back would be erased, and a new, more terrible tragedy was about to unfold on the shapeless isle. She sank to her knees, not in defeat, but in a desperate, frantic search for a way out. Far away, Alara Vane sat in the suffocating silence of her private study, a small, circular room crammed with precarious stacks of books and arcane instruments. She had received a copy of Kalen's official report. She knew how to read between the lines of the clock tower's sanitized, bureaucratic language. Mission failure due to unforeseen mental interference. Enforcer. Unit compromised and recalled for psychological evaluation. It was a death sentence, professionally and perhaps literally. She also knew what it truly meant. Kalen had seen what she had seen. And now, the clock tower was going to bury them both to preserve its own arrogant worldview. A soft chime from a small, silver bell on her desk alerted her to an incoming message. It was a clandestine communication from a junior technician in the policies department, a young man who owed her a significant debt. The message was short, cryptic, and terrifying. Enforcer K is locked in DC-7. Valerius has activated the Chalice Blade Protocol. Target: Gorgon. Asset: S. Valerius. Deployment in 6 hours. Alara's teacup clattered against its saucer. The Chalice Blade Protocol, a semi-mythical contingency plan whispered about in the highest circles, a plan for the permanent, conceptual neutralization of a spiritual entity. And Seraphina Valerius, a woman who moved through the clock tower like a ghost, spoken of only in hushed, fearful tones. This was Valerius's endgame. It was quiet, it was precise, and it was absolute. She had to do something. She had been a passive observer, a scholar. But the knowledge she possessed, the truth she had witnessed, now came with a responsibility. She could not stand by and allow this atrocity to happen. But what could she do? A direct warning was impossible. ALL communications with the outside were being monitored. She needed to get a message to the island. And she needed to get Kalen out of that room. The scholar's mind, a precision instrument trained for research and analysis, began to work with a cold, desperate fury. She pulled out a star chart of the Aegean, a thaumaturgical map of its ley lines, and a copy of her own energy readings from the island. She was looking for a loophole, a back door, a way to send a message that the clock tower's brute force monitoring systems wouldn't detect. She found it, a theoretical possibility, a long shot, a sympathetic resonance. She couldn't send a message to the island, but perhaps she could send a message through something that was already intrinsically linked to it. The petrified stone. Now she just needed the warrior. On the shapeless isle, the day after the enforcer's departure was one of strange, nascent peace. Heilani had awoken not to the familiar, gnawing rage, but to a quiet, aching emptiness that was somehow better. The warmth from the Fuinjutsu seal was a constant, comforting reality. She had watched, with a mixture of fear and fascination, as the sage who called himself her consort went about his work. Naruto was not idle. He explained to her that the petrified figures that littered her island were anchors for her curse, reservoirs of her pain that constantly fed the storm and the oppressive atmosphere. To truly heal the island, he said, they must first heal its memories. He walked to the first statue near the cavern's mouth, the figure of a proud, bearded warrior in Argive armor. His face a mask of frozen terror. Naruto placed a hand on the cold stone. He came seeking glory, he said to Heilani, who watched from a safe distance. But that was not all he was. He was a son, a husband, perhaps a father. His story did not begin and end with his challenge to you. Your curse has frozen him in his worst moment. It is time to let his story end in peace. He closed his eyes. A soft, gentle green light, the color of new spring leaves, began to glow from his palm. It was not the blue of his Fuinjutsu or the raw power of his personal energy. This was nature magic, pure and simple, the art of coaxing life and encouraging growth. The stone did not vanish or explode. It changed. The gray, lifeless texture softened, turning brown and rough. The warrior's limbs elongated, twisted, became branches. His torso thickened, becoming a trunk. His terrified face softened, blending into the whorls of bark. Within moments, the statue of a dead hero was gone. In its place stood a magnificent, ancient olive tree. Its leaves a shimmering silver green in the dim light, its branches heavy with the promise of fruit. A faint, peaceful spiritual echo of the man lingered for a moment, a whisper of gratitude on the wind. And then it was gone, released. Naruto moved to the next, a monstrous, lion-headed creature, and did the same. It became a gnarled, powerful oak. A fallen hero became a weeping willow. A slain beast became a cluster of resilient mountain pines. One by one, he was transforming her gallery of horror into a garden of peace. He was not destroying her past, as allowing it to grow into something new. After he had transformed a dozen of the statues, he turned to her. Your turn, he said simply. Heilani recoiled, her snakes hissing. I cannot. My touch destroys. It does not create. Your touch is an extension of your will, Naruto countered gently. For centuries, your will has been focused on rage and pain. Focus it on something else. Remember the goddess you were. The one who loved the warmth of the sun and the scent of the olive groves. The power to create is still within you. It is just sleeping. Let me help you wake it up. He approached her, his hand outstretched. Hesitantly, terrified of her own power, she extended one of her own clawed, monstrous hands. He did not flinch as he took it. He placed his other hand over hers, sandwiching her claws between his warm, living palms. Together, he said, he guided their joined hands to the next statue. Don't think about the curse. Don't think about the stone. Think about the tree. Think about life. She closed her eyes, her entire, massive form trembling with effort. She tried to push past the rage, past the pain, to find that tiny, buried memory of the sun. She felt Naruto's energy, warm and green and vibrant, flow through his hands, into hers, not forcing her, but guiding her, showing her the way. A faint, sickly green light flickered from her claws. It was not the vibrant green of his magic, but it was a start. The stone before them groaned, shifted, and slowly, arduously, began to transform, not into a healthy tree, but into a stunted, twisted petrified version of one. It was a failure, but it was a failure that had accomplished the impossible. She had willed something other than stasis into being. A choked sob escaped her. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. It was in that moment of fragile, desperate hope, as Naruto was about to offer her a word of encouragement, that he froze. His head snapped up, his gaze turning north, towards London. The gentle, creative aura around him vanished, replaced by a sharp, cutting edge of pure, focused power. What is it? Hailani hissed, her own moment of creation forgotten in the face of his sudden tension. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He could feel it, a faint, desperate signal, a message not sent through any conventional channel, but broadcast on a sympathetic frequency, a high-level piece of thaumaturgy that used the very concept of petrification as its carrier wave. It was a pinprick of data, riding on the resonance that connected every piece of stone on the island to the curse that had created them. It was a brilliant, desperate, and very, very faint message. He closed his eyes, his mind a razor-sharp scalpel, dissecting the weak, fragmented signal. It was a jumble of images and words, sent with haste and desperation. The image of a chalice, ornate and silver. The word, Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. A woman with moonlight hair and amethyst eyes. A blade in the dark. The name, Seraphina. A warning, she doesn't come for you. She comes for the queen. A weapon that erases the soul. 6 hours. The message faded. Naruto opened his eyes. The serenity of the sage was gone. In its place was the cold, absolute resolve of a guardian whose charge had just been threatened with the ultimate violation. The peace of their new morning was shattered. The children of the new age were not sending another hammer. They were sending a blade for the heart of the mountain. Chapter 8 End. The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.